It was a Friday night in early December, and a big gala was being thrown for the retiring state delegate. The event took place in a hall in the city center. Hundreds of people were present. Jessie sat nervously on the edge of a large table in the Hall of Presidents at Patriot Hall, a magnificent if somewhat prim building downtown. She was expecting the arrival of one person, her colleague whom she despised, Jeffrey Snyder. Somehow, Snyder managed to wriggle out and gain the upper hand in the race for two new partnerships their law firm was considering. She just had to get one of these partnerships. Simply necessary. The door opened and Snyder walked in. As usual, he was dressed in one of the most expensive suits money can buy. She expected that, like most scammers, he would complain that the suit didn't fit well and return it to the store on the Monday after the gala. With a poorly hidden grin, Snyder said, "Well, the lady is waiting?" Jessie answered him with an artificial smile as agreed. "I'm here." With his arms outstretched, the enemy approached her. "Let me take a look, beautiful lady." Jessie unzipped her dress, taking a step back. "You guarantee that my name will top the list, and whatever happens here will stay here." He grinned, of course. He had sex with her and then chuckled. "I'll put in a good word, but remember, you have to do your part. Otherwise they won't. Meet you halfway." Jessie winced, I'll remember. Having buttoned his trousers, Snyder left the same way he entered. "I hope you have a pleasant rest of the evening," he muttered sarcastically. Jessie sobbed, then coughed and held back a sob. This was her first betrayal, but not her last. Her husband, the man she loved more than her own life, knew nothing, but his world was about to change in the most terrible way. She hated herself. She hated Snyder. She hated senior partners. Her husband would never understand, but it didn't matter. She needed this partnership. Gary was a high school math teacher. His wife was a lawyer in a large firm downtown. She had been chasing the holy grail of a full partnership for a long time and thought she had finally made it to the shortlist. Gary hoped she did, hoped she would get it. He and their 3 daughters survived all the twists and turns of the process. As the head of the department, he knew that in any bureaucracy there was always a certain amount of manipulation. But his wife's company was large and the opportunities for intrigue were enormous. At today's big event, his wife continually went from table to table, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with politicians, other lawyers, and various influential people. She was always looking for opportunities to move forward, and he was proud of her determination. Twice during the evening she disappeared. He assumed she was participating in private meetings trying to gain support. Everyone did it. But what did all this have to do with their marriage? Gary was in one of the upstairs bathrooms, emptying his bladder when one of Jessie's co-workers, his wife's name being Jessie, for Jessamine, came inside. The man's face was red, as if he had just played sports. There was a wide smile on his face. In his hand, he was holding very expensive women's panties, not the kind sold at Victoria's Secret, but from stores like Nordstrom. He brandished this thin piece of clothing like a trophy of war, and as everyone soon learned, that's exactly what it was. His face lit up as he whispered loudly, "I got it!" Gary and the 3 other men in the bathroom had no idea who he was talking about. But one man whom Gary recognized as one of Jessie's co-workers muttered, "Come on." The first delinquent, a man with panties, lifted them and announced, "I caught her in one of the offices in the corridor. She was waiting there ready." He told all the details of what happened. The third man, another lawyer, looked at the panties with interest and said, "Can I take a look?" Another asked, "What did she look like?" The owner of the panties grinned and replied, "Damn, she looked great, and what an ass, God! For a woman her age, I'm telling you, she's just a dream." The third man said, "Good, huh?" The first one replied, "Are you kidding?" The third man asked, "What else has she done to you?" He asked hunningly. The owner of the panties, a large man about 6'4", looked to be about 35 years old, named Jeff, something like Jeff Snyder. Gary remembered. He'd seen him a couple of times at corporate events. Jessie knew him and said he was a scoundrel. What did he say? Gary missed something. This guy, Jeff Snyder, kept twirling the panties on his finger. He handed the panties to the second man, and then Gary found out who they belonged to his wife. She bought them that afternoon and showed them to him earlier that evening, right before she put them on. Gary realized that none of the men in the bathroom recognized him. Or if they did, they didn't care. They were more interested in the first man's trophy. The second man asked, What are you going to do with them?" The owner of the panties, who was definitely Snyder, replied, "I don't know. I can't leave. Then my fiancé might find them." The second man said, "Give them to me." A third added, "No, I want them." And then Gary chimed in, "I'll buy them." If these were his wife's panties, he needed to keep them from falling into the wrong hands. He knew the kind of people Jesse worked with. And if any of these men got their hands on her panties, all sorts of trouble could arise. Besides, these were his wife's panties. He'll need them later. The first man replied, "Really? How much will you give?" Before Gary could answer, one of the other men said, "I'll give you $50. Gary never thought his wife's panties could cost so much, but he had an idea of how they could be used. He was wearing a very expensive watch, not a Rolex, but a decent piece of jewelry that his wife had bought for him in the fall. He took it off his wrist. "What about this?" The proud owner of the silk treasure grabbed the watch and shoved the panties into Gary's hand. "Here he goes," he said. The second man asked, "What are you going to do with them?" Gary realized that they really didn't know who he was. He said, "I have a suspicion they belong to Jessamine McGowan. Am I right?" The first man nodded and said, "You are perceptive." Gary replied, "I don't know what I'll do with them, but I know one thing. She is eager to get a partnership." Holding up his panties, he added, "Who knows? Perhaps they will come in handy one day. By the way, she is married." The third man said, "Yeah, behind the school teacher or something." The second nodded. The one Gary knew as Snyder grinned and said, "Yeah, what a waste. Such a woman wasted on a schoolboy." They all laughed. At that moment, another person entered and their little meeting broke up. Gary went into one of the stalls, took some toilet paper, wrapped his precious, and put it in his coat pocket. 5 minutes later, he was back on the dance floor, casually wandering around in search of his wife. There was only one thing in his head. This is a woman of easy virtue. What a piece of trash she is. She had sex with me before a big event, and then later with some lawyer while I was downstairs, like a fool. He couldn't find her. She wasn't at their table, and he didn't see her on the dance floor. My mind kept repeating, who else is she sleeping with? Maybe she organized a whole line. Maybe she even seduced one of the senior partners. He wanted to kill her. This really made him angry, but what could he do? They have 3 children, 3 teenage girls. He felt lost on the dance floor. It seemed to him that everyone knew what his wife was doing. It seemed to him that everyone knew what was in his pocket. He needed to leave. He went to the main exit, went outside, and walked to the bushes where he vomited. Then he walked a little further and sat down on the curb. The concrete was cold and wet, but it was better than going back inside. How the hell was he going to survive the rest of this night? How will he explain himself to Jessie? If it was just him, he would know what to do. Take her home, drop her off at the door, and leave. But damn it, he had 3 girls. He took the panties out of his coat pocket. They were definitely hers. He sat on the cold, wet cement, holding them in his hands. A few hours ago, he watched her put them on. A few hours later, some creepy lawyer took them off her and had sex with her. Although he had never been prone to violence, now he felt ready for it. Jessie despised the lecherous Jeffrey Snyder, but she knew that the son of a bitch was looking for the same thing as her, a partnership. The problem was that Snyder had the advantage. He had something that she didn't have. She didn't know what, but she knew that he kept at least one of the senior partners on a short leash. She figured that if she could figure out what Snyder had on his hands, she could use it in a sort of quid pro quo. Unfortunately, the scoundrel managed to outsmart her. He knew that she was ashamed of her husband. He somehow used this to trick her into making a stupid bet that she now had to honor. Giving Snyder some sex was just part of it. The rest would come later. God, how she loved her husband. He was always there. He was the best. He was smart, the smartest man she knew. He was good to her, good to their 3 daughters, good in bed, and good to her parents. But he had no ambition. Poor Gary could have been anyone, but no, he wasn't. He was just another nice, soft-spoken teacher in a public school, and not even a high school, but a middle school. However, she felt dirty. She had never done anything like this before. No, not her. Until tonight, she was Mrs. Faithful. But she just had to get this partnership. Jessie, Mrs. Gary McGowan, was now in the hall trying to find her husband. She asked her personal secretary, a young woman named Gail Honeycutt, if she had seen her husband, but she answered in the negative. Jessie walked around the room, She checked the bar, the lounge, the dining room. Gary was nowhere to be found, but he must be somewhere nearby. Jessie, mean his wife, the mother of his children, was now a corporate woman of easy virtue. Damn, 20 years, 18 of which I married. What a disappointment. He sat on that cold concrete curb and thought about the past. They met when he was in his 3rd year at one of the state's top public universities. She was nearing graduation while working part-time thanks to her mother's influence at the local public library. She was pretty and often became the object of advances. He remembered how he carefully approached her without revealing all his cards. At first she was irritable and indifferent. It took him a long time to get past her defenses, but once he did, she turned out to be one of the sweetest girls he had ever met. Jessie was beautiful, blonde, and wearing her hair in a tight bun that befitted her status as a young lawyer. She was tall, about 5 feet 6 inches, with sky blue eyes, not particularly sexy, a little thin with small breasts, but mostly she was a very nice girl. He remembered how they dated during his 3rd year until almost his senior year. But then, during the summer, something came up. That something was a child, Dorothy. Jessie said she was taking pills, but it turned out she wasn't. Money was tight back then. He was the only child of a poorly educated single mother. Jessie's parents were wealthy, but that didn't make it any easier for him. Larry didn't want to get married, at least not then, and certainly not to Jessie. He loved her, but did not consider her suitable for marriage. When they first met, he thought she was sweet, maybe a little irritable, but the sex was so good that he thought he could tolerate her occasional outbursts. The problem was that its outbreaks were more like Category 5 hurricanes. If something went wrong, she could fly into a rage. When she even broke his windshield with an aluminum baseball bat, she said she was trying to reach him. This led to him asking her to see other people. At first she panicked, even cried. Then she said she agreed. A few months passed, and then she dropped the bomb she was pregnant. He himself barely made ends meet. His mother worked at Walmart and was struggling to cope. He himself worked 2 jobs to help his mother and pay for his education. He was trapped. His father, whoever he was, ran away when Gary's mother became pregnant. And although Jessie's parents were wealthy, he knew that he would never be able to escape from her. That first year was terrible. Jessie's parents never said anything, but he knew they blamed him for her pregnancy. No one wanted to get rid of the pregnancy, so her parents took them in. He still worked for FedEx, washing trucks at night, but Jessie's parents paid for his net education. They even took care of all the medical expenses. The very next year, in their 2nd year, they had Melanie, and 2 years later, Catherine. After that, having already had 3 daughters, she and Jessie became much more careful. Meanwhile, Gary got a job teaching mathematics at one of the local public schools. He started in high school, realized he liked it, and stayed there. He always wanted to go to college, and after Catherine was born, her determination only strengthened. Jessie's mom and Gary's mother helped with daycare so Jessie could study. Gary taught during the day and took care of the children in the evenings when he wasn't working. Money was tight, but Jessie was smart and hardworking. She completed her undergraduate degree in 3 years and immediately went to law school. 2 years later, she passed the bar exam and took an entry-level position at a downtown law firm where she has worked ever since. They worked hard, saved, and with the help of Jessie's parents, were able to save enough money for a down payment on a house, a small house built in the 1960s. Jessie's success in law school and her new job put her on the path to making a good living. Gary quit his night job and began spending more time with his daughters, including summer holidays. As Jessie became more successful in her legal career, her ambitions grew. 3 daughters, Jessie's growing ego, all this meant finding a bigger house, sending the girls to prestigious private schools, buying tons of clothes, installing a pool in the backyard, taking luxury vacations, and, as has become especially common lately, traveling on business and to meetings. They even recently bought a new car for their eldest daughter, Dorothy. It all seemed great to Gary, at least. That's what he thought until recently. Jessie made so much money that his income faded into the background. She herself chose a new house, took out a mortgage, paid bills, and resolved issues with clothes and cars. In the meantime, his salary was enough to pay for insurance, groceries, utilities, and the purchase of small, nice things for himself and his daughters. A small sailboat, hunting rifles and shotguns, a boat with a motor, and a safe, slow prim. Of course, Gary was no slacker. With a background in mathematics, he understood something about finance and began secretly saving money in mutual funds registered only in his name. He didn't hide anything. He just believed that he should have something personal that belonged only to him. Jesse's career success also left him with many household responsibilities, and he took on not only all the cleaning and laundry, but also taking care of the girls. He understood that many men would feel uncomfortable with such a situation, but for him it was quite natural. Jessie was busy with her career, and he could take care of the children and household chores. He loved his role as a stay-at-home mom and had no regrets. So there you go. Gary had an attractive, ambitious, and now unfaithful wife, 3 wonderful daughters, spitting images of his mother and himself, a high school teacher who was financially literate but perhaps not smart enough, a housewife in the modern world, and according to, in the opinion of some, perhaps even a lazy parasite, dependent on his wife. It all depended on what point of view you look at it from. If we talk a little more about money, Gary paid Social Security contributions all year. As he guessed, Jessie's tax-free threshold came earlier every year. Whereas before her income was exempt from contributions around New Year's like his, now it was around Thanksgiving, then Labor Day, then Flag Day, and now perhaps even Mother's Day. He didn't know exactly because Jessie kept her income and expenses secret, but he suspected that they were swimming in money. That's how it was. He returned to their table and sat down. His wife's panties were still in his coat pocket. It was obvious that he needed to do something. He'd heard stories of men, and more often than not women, knowing their spouses were cheating, but either pretending it wasn't happening or coming up with cunning plans to install hidden cameras or hire detectives to catch the cheater red-handed. Gary was neither. He wasn't one for cunning, but he knew something had to be done, but he wasn't sure what yet. He asked the man sitting next to him what time it was. He said that it was almost 11:30, almost time to go home. Jessie decided that since Dorothy was already 17 and soon to be 18, the girls did not need a babysitter, but tomorrow was Saturday and he had a lot to do, vacuuming and laundry to do. Besides, neither he nor Jessie wanted to stay out too late. It was December. The holiday season had begun and they still had to decorate the house and put up the tree. He and the girls had already cut down the Christmas tree at the farm a week ago, and he thought that tomorrow evening or Sunday they would put it up and decorate it. Yes, even though Jessie said she didn't care, they still bought a live tree. The girls wanted it so much. Gary also liked the live tree. They had a cat, a gray tabby named Jupiter who was 8 years old, and a chocolate Labrador named Daisy who was 9. Both were good with Christmas trees. But anyone who had a Labrador knew that anything could happen to their tails. Jessie didn't particularly like Daisy. She said she would have preferred a smaller dog. He saw Jessie cross the dance floor. She looked irritated and her makeup was slightly smeared. He hasn't decided anything yet. What should he do? Well, definitely nothing at the party, and certainly nothing in front of the girls when they got home, but he wasn't about to bury his head in the sand. He decided that he would bring up the topic on the way home. Jessie sat down at the table. She was angry that she could not find her husband. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I've been looking for you everywhere. You made me worry." Gary tried to hide the grin that had crept onto his face. He was sure she was worried that he might find out what she was doing. It seemed to him that his blood pressure had increased. Jessie might be a real tyrant, but he also had a temper. And what he learned today was almost too much. He squeezed the table, reminding himself of his daughters. He replied, "I felt nauseous, so I went outside for a while." He watched as Jessie tried to hide the look of displeasure on her face. He was increasingly tired of her contemptuous attitude lately, her indifference to everything. He said her frequent disparaging remarks. Now he understood where it all came from. She said, "You could have told someone I was worried." Gary muttered to himself, "I doubt it." She didn't quite understand him. "What did you say?" He replied, "I said I doubt you were worried." "Where were you?" She frowned. "I have a career, remember?" He chuckled semi-sarcastically. "Oh yeah, exactly. My job pays the bills," she said sarcastically. Gary yawned. "I think I'll go get dessert, and then maybe have another drink." He stood up and headed towards the dessert buffet. He heard his wife mutter, "Fat ass." He felt in his pocket that the panties were still there. They stayed in the evening a little longer. Jesse needed to finish his rounds. Sitting at the table, he watched as she briefly chatted with Snyder. He noticed Snyder glance quickly in his direction. Gary pretended not to notice, but wondered what was going through his head. He wondered what Jessie herself thought. He thought that if it weren't for the girls, this would be his last evening with her. And maybe it would be. Jessie had to stay until the very end of the event, so they didn't get to the car until after 2 o'clock in the morning. Although Gary was driving, it was Jessie's car, her Mercedes. His Cherokee Chevrolet pickup truck and the RAV4 Dorothy drove were not suitable for such an important event. The doorman brought the car. Gary helped Jessie sit up, sat down himself, and they drove home. It was only 40 minutes from home, more than enough time to start talking about panties. On the way home, Gary drove slower than usual. It was early Saturday morning. The roads were wet from drizzling rain, and he himself was haunted by the uncertainty of how to behave in this situation. As they drove, he asked, "Did you have a good time? Did you manage to achieve anything?" Jessie was feeling a little unwelled. Too much alcohol and fatty foods, plus the anxiety she felt after meeting Jeff Snyder. Why did she do this? And this stupid bet, she knew she would have to fulfill it. Snyder had her panties. What a fool she was. She was tormented by the question, did Snyder really give them to Gary? She didn't dare look at her husband. He was stupid and naive, and he wouldn't have the intelligence to do something like that. She replied, yes, it was fun, met a few new people, and yes, seems to have made some progress. The contract with Lombard looks like it will be signed soon. How are you? Did you have a good time? Gary was disgusted with himself. He needed to put this woman of easy virtue in her place, stuff her own panties down her throat. In general, yes, he said. Although there was a moment when I felt that something was going wrong. Something was terribly wrong. But otherwise, it was a good evening. His stomach was churning and his chest was hurting. He wondered if Jessie could feel it. It's unlikely she was too busy with herself. She didn't like his tone. He sounded tense and she knew that tone. Something was brewing. Did he know something? Did he find out? She didn't know what to do with her hands and began fiddling with them nervously. He should have stopped before he noticed anything. She put her hands in the pockets of her expensive fur coat with a fox collar that she had bought a few weeks ago. She saw him on a mannequin in the window and simply could not pass by. If Gary had known how much it was worth, he would have been furious. But Gary knew nothing about finances or her income. He was too stupid to pay attention to such things. Did something go wrong? She asked, trying to make her voice sound worried, although she didn't care. She made a remark that he would definitely understand. Strain your back while dancing with one of our young secretaries, or argued with one of the lawyers about the right way to hit the ball, she laughed, just wondering. Her laugh was slightly mocking. She knew that her husband did not like golf and played rarely. Why doesn't he go faster? She was tired and had a headache. Gary listened. He had great golf clubs. Jessie bought them herself. And he played sometimes. But he didn't like the sport. To him, it reminded him of NASCAR racing. People watching overloaded cars driven by highly paid drivers make left turns for hundreds of miles in a circle. Golf seemed to him a game in which grown men in colored shirts quietly cursed and cheated because they could not get the ball into the hole. Golf courses, he thought, were simply a waste of good land, and with 3 daughters, he didn't have time for golf. The eldest Dorothy played, but did it mainly for her mother, and the other 2 didn't even show interest. The middle daughter, Melanie, was like him, a hunter. He thought Jessie only mentioned golf to emphasize that only the elite like her colleagues played the sport. Just another little prick. No big deal. That asshole Jeffrey Snyder must have been a golf master. He looked at his wife. No, he replied, nothing like that. Just talking to the guys about sex. She looked at him. Did any of the men pester you? She touched his cheek. You're so handsome, you know. She knew that this always irritated him. No, nothing like that, he said. More about who sleeps with whom in the office. Jessie's antennae went up. This idiot was as transparent as glass he knew something. She pretended not to understand anything. Did you learn anything interesting? Maybe, he replied. The moment has come. Gary pulled her panties out of his pocket. Seen these before. He thought he handled the situation pretty well. He did not chicken out and maintained his composure. No anger, just humorous. Containing the rage that was tearing him up inside, he thought, let's see how she gets out of this. Jesse looked at the panties in horror. How did he get them? Did Snyder really give them to him? If so, then she will be obliged to fulfill her promise. Why did she do this? Why did you make this stupid bet? She tried to suppress her emotions. When Gary was really angry, he became a real madman, and what she did would definitely make him furious. Usually his anger turned out to her advantage. He lost his temper, screamed, swore, but then just as quickly cooled down. Often she even made him apologize for things she had provoked. He wasn't really a fighter at home. He considered himself a peacemaker. If she could bear the pressure, she might be able to intimidate him this time. She decided to vomit. She grabbed the panties and said defiantly, "Where did you get them?" He replied, "I bought them. In one of the upstairs bathrooms, some guy was bragging that he slept with a colleague." Right on the table. "These are yours, right?" She rolled down the window and threw her panties out onto the street. "No, not mine. Who told you that they are mine? One of the guys, he said there were 4 of us." "Well, they're not mine," she said, crossing her arms as if to sum it up. She smiled, thinking, they are gone, thrown away. There's nothing more to argue about. There was nothing. Gary was angry. He couldn't remember when he had been angrier. He was furious. He knew they were her panties, and her throwing them away didn't change anything. But he had to control himself. "I think it's them," he said. "I know for sure it's them, but all you have to do is lift up your dress and show me yours. And then I'll know for sure." That was it, the last frontier. She knew it, and he knew it. He added, "Show me your panties, Jesse," but she was determined not to admit anything. She went all out. "These are not my panties, and no, I will not lift my dress. If you don't believe me, if you don't trust me, then you can kiss my ass." Gary's stomach tightened. His stomach hurt, his chest hurt even more. It all started at the gala evening, when he was sitting at the table waiting for her to return from her negotiations. Now it was 10 times worse, and drinking bourbon wasn't helping. All he had to do was agree, say okay, and that would be the end of it. He could have simply closed his eyes and pretended nothing had happened. Halfway home he asked, "Who was this guy?" "There was no guy," Jessie answered. She could not sit still. She crossed her arms, then opened them again, fidgeted in the seat, and crossed her legs. He knew. Damn it, he knew. Gary looked at her and thought she was classic Jessie. "Just lift up your dress, honey. Let's get this over with." He said it in a joking tone, but it wasn't really a joke. "No," she screamed. "It was too much." "Damn it," he barked. It was Jeffrey Snyder. "Damn, Jeffrey, you fucking asshole. What crap? And you slept with him. There were 4 of us in the damn bathroom, all lawyers, and all from your firm. I don't know if the others recognized me, but I'm sure Snyder recognized me." Jeffrey was beside himself. He was bragging. He said that you wanted this yourself. He said you liked it. "You're trash, you damn thing. You, damn it, are a woman of easy virtue. I bought your damn panties. I gave him the expensive watch you gave me. I was glad because I never liked him." She started shouting back, Okay, there was one guy, and yes, he achieved his goal. "So what? I slept with a man at a big party. So what? He, like me, wants to become a partner. I may need his support. He may need mine. It's a mutually beneficial agreement, that's all." She became even more excited. Her voice rang even louder. "This is my body. It was just a business moment, a bet, that's all. And this has nothing to do with us at all. It wasn't even sex, at least not good sex." She glanced at her husband a little more quietly, smiled falsely, and added, "Not like that. With you and me." Gary felt sick. He pulled over, opened the car door, leaned over, and vomited. Only alcohol and mucus came out of it. Jesse looked in horror. He wasn't going to give up. This coward, she thought, wanted a fight. She needed to pull herself together. As soon as he closed the door, she decided to change tactics and switch to seduction. "You have to be reasonable." Gary likes to be reasonable. Calmly, she began to speak. "I will need his help. I need to become a partner. This will be useful for both him and me. It will be good for the girls and good for you too." She felt better. Gary still looked pale, but he was no longer screaming. It was hopeless for him. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to vomit again. She wanted calm, reasonable discussion. She thought she could talk her way out of it. "Jesse," he said, "you were my favorite. We are married. We swore fidelity to each other. Do you remember?" This infuriated her. How pathetic he is. She will now arrange for him to swear allegiance to him. She snapped, "As if you were always such a saint. I know about you and these young girls. all these cute interns. It was a strong statement, and she knew it. But who cares? She wanted to confuse him. But Gary, it sounded as if she had plunged a knife straight into his heart. He had never in all these years cheated on her. Jesse, he said, that's not true. I never. But she didn't listen. Let this weakling cry as much as he wants. She decided to go to the end to achieve victory at any cost. Victory she must win. Nonsense. Do you think I don't know? The girls tell me everything. They know everything. They were only a mile from home when Gary slowed down. He was beside himself with rage and hit back. It's a lie and you know it. Jesse, damn, you slept with a guy on the desk for a promotion. He said you were waiting for him. He said you liked it. He bragged about it to a bunch of other men. He was waving your damn panties like a flag. Damn it, Jesse, what's wrong with you? Do you understand what you did? You destroyed 20 years, and for what? For the sake of partnership. She screamed back. This was not an answer, but simply a wild cry. Stop it. Stop the car right now. Gary was shaking with anger. He was in such a state that he could not control himself. What? Are you crazy? Should I stop the car here? She screamed again. Stop. Let me out. If you don't stop me, I'll jump out. She opened the door slightly. Damn, he thought. Why didn't I turn on the child's safety locks? Now she could really jump out. He pulled over to the side of the road. She rolled down the window. It was cold outside. She jumped out of the car, slammed the door, and screamed. Go to hell, he shouted back, Jesse. She walked away. She was out of her mind. He saw her fur coat and purse on the passenger seat. He was outside in a damn almost open dress with a strapless bra. What should he do now? Should he leave? He was sure that she had left her things in the car on purpose. Maybe leave? Certainly. Why not? So what next? Come home and tell 3 girls that he left their mother on the highway, half naked and in the cold and dark alone at 4 a.m. Of course not. He drove slowly, following her down the road. Damn it, it was windy. He saw her trembling, clenching her hands on her shoulders. He yelled out the window. Jesse, get back in the damn car. She ignored him. He yelled again. Jesse, come on. It's cold outside. You will freeze to death. Damn, Jesse, think about the girls. She stopped, but she didn't look at him. She continued to tremble. He looked at her, thinking that maybe he should just drive away. Just leave her. She looked at the ground. Of course she won't look at him. She was as guilty as ever. What he wanted to do was go out, rip off her dress, and leave her naked to freeze. He clenched his fist and hit the dashboard. The damn vinyl is cracked. His damn school ring left a crack. This was the ring she bought for him. He tore it off his finger, rolled down the window, and threw it as far as he could. Finally, she opened the door and returned to the car. The first thing she said was, "It doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't prove anything." He used the remote control on the door, raised her window, and turned on the child locks. She looked cold and sick. He thought he should try a different approach. Maybe if he calms her down, he had seen her like this often before. Once while still at university, she became so fixated on one subject that she went completely crazy. Then she received a B. The girls were still small and don't remember, but she caused a real scandal. She ran around the house, screaming and yelling. She screamed that she had been deceived and that she would take revenge on the teacher. She grabbed the kettle and threw it, breaking through the wall. Unable to calm down, she grabbed the pan and threw it out the kitchen window. He grabbed her, hugged her, and whispered to her until she calmed down. There were other moments, a broken vase, a broken mirror in the bathroom. One day she almost hit him with a music box he bought her. He managed to stop her, but she still managed to break the box. When it was all over, not only did she not remember why she was angry, but she also did not remember how she broke the box. After that B incident, she never saw grades like that again. She only got an A in law school. He knew she cheated on her grades a couple of times, and he knew she took advantage of some of her classmates, but he never said anything. It is better to maintain peace in the house, especially with girls around. Sometimes he wondered how she managed to manipulate the elderly professors, but he never thought that she could use her body, not her. She had never been like that. And now, sitting in the car, he was no longer sure of it. They arrived at their house. He had to say something. Both were still slightly drunk. He didn't know what to say, but something had to be said. He knew his wife well. She was a fighter who almost never backed down, especially since she started working at the law firm. He had to get her to confess, to calm down, but he knew he had to be careful. He needed to be firm, but he knew that she also needed to be appeased and calmed down. He looked at her. It was as if she was challenging him to an argument. One look, and he started to get angry again. Who the hell does she think she is? But he had to try. Jesse, I love you. You love me. We have always been a team. It was always just us and the girls. Honey, no job, no career, no promotion is worth risking everything we have, everything we mean to each other. Who was he kidding? He had to take revenge. No compromises, no softness. This was the battle he had to win. He began to fume. Why did you sleep with that bastard? When did you turn into a woman of easy virtue? She continued to hiccup and cough. This did nothing to help his growing anger. He became sarcastic. Darling, sweetheart, it's not just about marital vows or one instance of adultery. Now he was really sarcastic, openly mocking. It's only one commandment. You still have 9 left. The voice became louder. It's not even a matter of trust. He laughed. Say the right words and I'll trust you again. Like I always have. But you have to make things right. Damn it, just apologize. I don't need a long apology or some pathetic whining from a little woman of easy virtue. He laughed again. I already have this woman of easy virtue. Just admit it. Say you're sorry. Tell me it won't happen again. Say it only happened once. Tell me it wasn't worth that dirty promotion at a damn law firm where all they do is steal money from honest people. Damn, what kind of promotion is worth becoming a woman of easy virtue? Tell me it won't happen again. I'll even forgive you. I promise we can get through this. If we can't, well, Katie's 15. She'll be leaving for college in 3 years, and then we'll part ways. She continued to cry, breathing heavily, almost suffocating. What else could he say? He thought he had found the answer. He said, listen, honey, I'll come down to your office on Monday morning. I'll find Snyder. I'll put him in his place. I'll make him say that you were under the influence and didn't understand what you were doing. I'll tell him that I'm not going to complain to your bosses. I'll lie and say I still have your panties. I will say that they have his DNA on them. With that and the moral standards of the company, I'm sure I can shut him up. You will see I will fix everything, and you will be safe. It will all be over, and we can start again. This sounded quite noble to Gary. He knew that any real man would have kicked her to hell, but he loved her, and they also had 3 angels. What happened next shocked him. It shouldn't have, but still, she didn't listen to him. She started crying again. She got out from his side of the car, shouting, "You're worthless, you pathetic little slug. You are the powerless son of a woman of easy virtue. You don't understand anything. You are nothing. You are nobody. Pathetic little mouse. A boring middle school arithmetic teacher in a regular public school." She slammed the door and ran towards the house. He sat in the car, stunned. What he just heard spoke for itself. Everything changed without him noticing. It was like drowning. Was this the final moment when everything ends? The moment of death? What did he do wrong? He wanted her to confess, to tell what happened and how it happened. Yes, he wanted her to cry. He wanted her to say that she was sorry, that she had made a mistake, to ask him to forgive her. Yes, he wanted her to beg. Okay, he wasn't in the best shape. He was confused, embarrassed, maybe a little drunk, but she didn't understand that. Or did you understand? Gary loved his wife. They had been through a lot together. They had 3 wonderful children, and he wanted to help her. He wanted to do a lot of things. He wanted to take her into his arms, forgive her, tell her that they could work things out. He wanted to be the man she could always rely on, the man she married, and he wanted to kill her. He remembered a line from a poem. There is a time, we don't know when, there's a border, we don't know where, which decides the fate of a person to glory or despair. There is a line invisible to us that crosses every path. It is the hidden boundary between God's patience and his wrath. To cross this line means to die. Tonight, Jessie crossed that hidden boundary. Gary has always been her rock during difficult times, her ever-loyal husband and responsible father. Where did it all go wrong? He realized that it didn't matter now, at least for her. To her, he was nothing. He was like a spare part, something extra unnecessary. Really, what could he offer her? Nothing she couldn't get from her work colleagues. He got out of the car and followed her into the house. Inside, all the girls were on their feet, not sleeping, and were in the living room. They were wearing pajamas, the kind teenagers were. Everyone looked at him with wide eyes, scared and innocent. Jessie was already upstairs, crying, screaming, and throwing things. Dorothy asked, "What happened, Dad?" The other 2 just stood there. Catherine looked scared. Melanie had that concentrated expression on her face that she often had when she was. They reminded him of the three angels. They were so similar to their mother when he first met her when she worked in the library. He said, "Mom and I are going through difficulties." What else could he say? In the first few years, Jessie continued to sob, scream, and swear, behaving completely inappropriately. Gary quickly walked up the stairs. She was in the bedroom and packing things into a suitcase. She looked at him and started screaming again. "I hate you. I hate this place. I hate this house. I hate our children. I hate everything. I'm leaving. I never want to see you again. Don't call me. Don't ever try to meet me." She was shaking. She screamed, "If I had a gun, I would shoot you right now." After packing her suitcase, she ran out into the corridor and ran down the stairs, crying and sobbing. She paused for a moment to kiss each of her daughters. She walked to the front door, opened it, turned around, and screamed at her husband. "I hate you. I never want to see you." She turned around, slammed the door, and walked to the car. Gary followed her to the door, opened it, and looked outside just as she reached her car. She showed him the middle finger, got into the car, and drove away. He turned to look at his girls. "We had a fight," he said. Dorothy sat up and asked, "What did you do?" Catherine ran upstairs. She wasn't crying yet, but he knew it was about to start. They ordered pizza while he and Jessie were at the event. Melanie began rummaging through one of the boxes. Melanie was funny about it. In moments of crisis, she always found something to do. "Is there anything left for me?" he asked. Melanie didn't raise her head. "Only cheese, but it's already cold." Dorothy, sitting in her mother's favorite chair, said, "Dad, you must have told her something." "I haven't seen her in this state for a long time." She was right. Jessie had had tantrums before, but this was the worst. He said, "Mom is having a hard time with this partnership. I think if we give her some time, everything will work out." He didn't believe it himself, but he couldn't think of anything else. Dorothy stood up, put her hand on Melanie's shoulder, and said, "Come on, Melanie. Let's spot check on Katie." Katie was Catherine's nickname. Dorothy led Melanie upstairs. Nobody said anything else. Gary took a piece of pizza and tried it. Melanie was right. The pizza was cold. He collected the leftovers, put the uneaten pieces in the refrigerator, and threw the boxes in the trash. Having tidied up a little at about 4 in the morning, he went upstairs and, completely exhausted, went to bed. The next morning, around 9, with a terrible headache from the alcohol he had drunk the night before, he heard a knock on his bedroom door. "Yes," he said. Dorothy opened the door and entered. "Mom wrote a message." He asked, "Yes, what did she say?" "Mom apologized to us girls, but she said, you don't need to call her or try to find her." Then she asked, "What did you and Mom quarrel about?" Gary yawned, stretched, and scratched his head. What could he say? What caught their mother cheating with another man? Hardly. He tried to smile. Now is not the best time to have this conversation. But this is what she did, and she can't handle it. Dorothy asked, "You didn't do anything, did you?" "No, I was just being myself, like always." She said, "Melanie and Catherine are very upset. Let me shower and get dressed. Then we all go out to lunch." "Maybe then," Dorothy interrupted. "Melanie and I already have plans." "Oh, okay. Then maybe in the evening." She said, "It's better this way," adding, "Be careful with Catherine. She's very upset." Gary replied, "I'll be careful. You two are good girls. We'll talk about everything in the evening." She smiled and, closing the door, said, "Okay, Dad." Then she opened the door again. "I'm going for a walk with my boyfriend. Can we take Catherine with us?" He said, "Of course." He closed the door, and Gary tried to go back to sleep. Or at least he tried. He got up again around 10 in the morning. It was Saturday, and he needed to take care of business. He changed the bed linen and put on new sheets and pillowcases. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the consequences of yesterday. Yes, he understood that this could be the end. He remembered how she came home yesterday afternoon. He wore a loose blue cotton dress just above the knee with long sleeves trimmed with white trim at the cuffs and neckline. There were probably a dozen buttons on the front. He remembered how nervous he was and how excited she was then. He started the laundry, starting with the girls' clothes. I started the dishwasher and put away the clean dishes. He occupied himself with everything he could. He knew that if Jessie decided to return and the house was not tidy, she might cause a scandal again. He didn't have any work to do at school. He dealt with that on Friday. As a result, he even found time to do a little digging in the garage, putting his tools in order. His car and truck were clean. He owned a Chevy Silverado and a Jeep Cherokee. He tried to keep busy so as not to think about his wife. But he finally gave up, returned to the house, and opened an app on his phone that allowed him to track her location. Her car was parked in front of the Hampton Inn nearby. It made sense. She couldn't stay the night with Snyder, her lover, because he had a fiancé. But Jessie probably called him to find out how her panties got into Gary's hands. Surely she wanted to yell at him for waving her underwear around in the men's bathroom. Gary doubted she had said anything to her parents. They wouldn't understand it. In addition, she always knew how to keep her parents, both hers and his, away from her. Affair. He wondered if she had been trying to contact any of the girls since she sent Dorothy's message that morning. Gary walked in circles, not knowing what to do. Late in the afternoon, before the girls had even returned, he began to accept the facts. Based on what Jessie had said the night before, he could only come to one conclusion. For her, their marriage was over, and he agreed with that. If he had any hope that their relationship could be saved, it destroyed it. She called him a worthless person, a weakling, and a nobody. Such words clearly indicated a complete lack of respect. The worst thing was that she behaved like a woman of easy virtue, and no man would put up with that. Dorothy and Catherine returned home first. Melanie arrived a little later. He thought maybe they could all have dinner together. He knew they liked Applebee's. He liked to order hake there. He gathered them all in the living room and suggested, "How about we go to Applebee's and have dinner and talk?" Dorothy replied, "No, Dad, I think it's better to talk here." "Okay," he said, "but first let me say that I think this is going badly. I think Mom and I are heading towards a sad ending." No one said anything for several minutes, until finally Melanie spoke up. "I'm not really interested in this. When I skip this and go to Carla, honey, you need to eat," he said. Dorothy intervened. "No, let him go." She then turned to Melanie and added, "Take Katie with you. I'll stay home and talk to Dad." "Okay," Melanie said, and as if nothing had happened, her little sisters went upstairs to get ready. Gary looked at Dorothy and asked, "You know something, don't you?" "Mom was very busy," Dorothy said. "And do you remember when I went to her office before Thanksgiving for Career Day?" "Yes," he replied. Dorothy continued, "There's a lot going on there. Some of the young lawyers were too familiar with her. I don't know. I think she liked it. I remember how Hannah's parents acted before their divorce." He remembered that Hannah was one of Dorothy's friends. "Did you see something?" he asked. "No, Dad," she replied. "I don't think Mom did anything serious, but I think the main thing for her now is herself. She needs this promotion. Maybe if you give her some time, she'll come around in a few days. You know, she's been traveling a lot lately. Last week she was in New York, and before that she was in Boston. She works a lot. I think you may have added extra pressure to her last night, and she exploded. I'm not saying it's your fault, but maybe you need to be more patient." He wanted to say something. Dorothy spoke sincerely, but she did not understand the whole situation. "Okay, Dorothy, I'll wait. We'll all wait. I will do as you all say." She came up and hugged him, then said, "Maybe we can put up a Christmas tree tomorrow." "Maybe that's a good idea," Gary said. "When Mom gets home, she'll feel better." She smiled. "I knew you would understand." Well, everything was decided for that day. Dorothy went upstairs to rest. Melanie and Catherine left. Gary went to Applebee's alone and ordered hike, salad, and Coke. On Sunday, they took out all the New Year's decorations and decorated the tree. Gary was in charge of the lights and setting up the nail for the top, while the girls did the rest, hanging the toys and garlands. He especially liked it when they hung decorations they made as children. They used to go to the Methodist church. There, the girls went to Sunday school and did all those cute crafts related to church and God. They had Christian symbols, little paper decorations made when they were babies. Jessie always puts everything away neatly for storage. When Dorothy was a baby, Jessie made an apron that they put on the bottom of the tree. She previously taught Sunday school while she was in college and law school. He still didn't understand how she managed everything. They stopped going to church when they moved into their current home, and Catherine started high school. He guessed that the church was no longer cool. Overall, he felt the day had gone well. He felt good, but also a little sad. He hoped Dorothy was right, and hoped that maybe Jesse's infidelity was the result of fatigue or alcohol or her over-focus on her career. Maybe everything will work out. Maybe it will get better, but it may not work out. If things worked out, he knew he'd have a lot to swallow. They finished decorating the Christmas tree. Everyone stood in a circle around her and sang, "Oh, Christmas tree, my Christmas tree." Melanie said, "We have to do it again." When Mom comes back, everyone agreed. About an hour after they finished, Dorothy received a message. She saw that it was from Jesse and left the room to read it. When she returned, she was crying. "Dad," she said, "Mom wants to know how quickly you can leave her house." He was surprised and asked, "What?" First of all, she said, "Mom doesn't want to talk to you, not now or ever." She said it's her house. She's paying for it and she wants you to leave. When I asked her where you should go, she said you should go to hell. "Dad," Dorothy added, "you must really have done something." Ignoring the accusation, he asked, "She doesn't want to talk to me." "No," replied Dorothy, "she won't let me write to her." He thought that he could have at least sent her a message earlier. Dorothy said, "Mom said she wants you to go away and never see her again. She wrote that she hated you and that the only good thing you did was help her create us." He stood there in complete disbelief. Dorothy cried quietly, "I don't think she means it, Dad, but maybe you should leave or do something. She wants me to answer her. She said, if you text her, she will block your messages." Jesse was right about the house. He had a legal right to part of the property, but no moral right to the house. However, he needed to clarify something. "Ask her if I can pick up my tools, and what if I want to come see you girls?" Dorothy sent a message and almost immediately received a response. Mom said leave the tools, take only clothes and personal items. She said that you and she will resolve the issue of visiting the girls during the divorce process. This made Catherine cry. Melanie went upstairs. It was madness, absolutely complete madness. He should have told her to go to hell. He should have said that he wasn't going anywhere and that she should go home and deal with her problems. But he didn't say that. He didn't want to make a scene in front of the girls. He thought that Jesse, on the contrary, was eager to fight in front of the children. "Dorothy," he said, "tell your mother I can leave by Wednesday evening." At first, he thought that maybe if he left and she returned home, they could talk and figure things out. But then, having thought better, he realized that there was nothing to find out. She turned out to be a woman of easy virtue, and that was the end. On Monday, he called work and said he was sick. He had enough sick days he could afford it. He started looking for a good lawyer and soon found the right one. He left all their joint bank accounts untouched, but made sure his mutual funds were safe. He didn't think Jesse knew about them. On Tuesday, he went to see his lawyer, who told him all the unpleasant details. Gary knew he was vulnerable in their no-fault state, but he didn't know how vulnerable. Jesse, if she wanted, could get half the money he put away in his funds. On the other hand, his name was on the contract for the sale of the house, so he could give her a hard time. Their savings, almost all of which were her money, were also at risk. The money is an interesting question. She made more than he did. He didn't know how much more. But when he mentioned her tax exemption threshold to Jesse's lawyer, he was shocked. The lawyer assured him that if Jesse filed for divorce, she would pay him alimony. As for everything else, the boats, his tools, the guns, she could demand that they be sold, and the money divided equally. But he could demand to sell the house and do the same. Honestly, Gary didn't want to deal with all this crap his lawyer was talking about. The lawyer said he would draw up the papers and have them ready by Friday. Gary agreed. He wanted to wait, hoping that Jesse would come to his senses. She was acting crazier than ever, and he had seen her do crazy things. Gary knew that most likely their marriage would end. All he wanted was an amicable separation that would cause minimal harm to the children. On Tuesday evening, when he began to pack his things, the girls found a convenient excuse to leave the house. It didn't take that long. In fact, he was surprised at how minimal his presence in the house was. He needed a small suitcase for his toiletries, toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, razor, shaving cream, and dental floss, and with that, he was ready. Of course, he had jewelry, but he decided not to take it. Cufflinks, tie clips, and onyx ring. All of these were gifts from Jesse, and he never wore any of them. The only piece of jewelry he kept was his wedding ring, and he wondered how long he would need. He had already thrown away his school ring. In his closet, he had a couple of suits, several sports jackets, a pair of trousers, several shirts, and 3 pairs of shoes. He kept the expensive things she bought him. In the chest of drawers, he found several pairs of socks, handkerchiefs, colored and white t-shirts and boxers, plus 1 coat, several light work jackets, the leather jacket Jesse bought him last Christmas, and an old LL jacket. Bean, he put all this in the living room. There were also photographs. The house was full of them, but he left them too. He thought that if he took just 1 photo, it might upset the girls, so he didn't take any. Inside, he lowered the tailgate of his pickup truck, and within minutes, all of his material possessions were loaded. Even though she was his dog, he would have to leave Daisy behind. He looked around. Apart from what he was wearing and what he planned to wear in the morning, there was nothing else left. 18 years of life and love. All this fits into the back of a truck. In a way, it was like death when you pack up all the earthly belongings of the deceased. All that was left was to find a place to stay and wait for the finale. Sad, he thought, but inevitable. He left on Wednesday morning, just after the girls left for school. Nobody said anything. He hoped that they, like him, would just wait for this to all pass, for Jesse to come to do it, his senses, and they could somehow work this out peacefully. Jesse didn't come to her senses. He received the documents on Thursday when he left work. He sat down and read them. He was completely at a loss. This couldn't be real. From the very beginning, he realized that she knew much more about his private finances than she had ever let on. She knew about all his mutual funds and some other little things like trust funds for girls. She made it clear that she did not want to claim them. As for herself, she wanted to keep the house, her and Dorothy's cars, and all the money in their joint accounts. In exchange, she refused alimony, but instead offered to pay him alimony for 2 years and not the exact amount of his monthly income. How could she know this? She demanded full custody of the girls, but offered him 2 days off a month and every Wednesday evening for unlimited visits. In addition, he could attend all their social and academic events as long as he avoided meeting her. However, regarding the children's future education and summer holidays, all decisions had to be discussed, with Jesse having the final say. The girls were still on his health insurance, which was great, but now that was going to change. They were switching to hers, which was more expensive, but which Gary figured was another way for Jesse to demonstrate control. As for all things recreational, he could keep a small boat with a sail, but the motorboat remained his. His tools and all firearms were to be appraised and sold, and the money divided equally. This was her revenge. She knew how much he loved hunting, and every man treasures his tools. Meanwhile, all her jewelry, as well as his jewelry, with the exception of his wedding ring, were to remain with her. The documents contained a vague reference to other articles of clothing and personal effects that were of interest only to her and which also remained her property. He was sure there were things she bought that he didn't even know about. But he didn't care. Through her lawyer, she categorically stated that there could be no reconciliation, no family counseling, no meetings ever. This was supposed to be the final decision. No arguing, no persuasion, no requests for forgiveness. There are no confessions or apologies on her part. He read the documents twice before he fully grasped the point. The terms she offered, considering her finances and his, were fair, even brutally fair. He remembered that he had married Jessie when she was a sweet, if sometimes irritable, girl. He shared the joy of their children's early childhood years and life with a student who was striving to achieve her goals in college and law school. He shared a loving but somewhat troubled life with Jessie, who was becoming an increasingly ambitious lawyer willing to do anything for her career. Now she has become a predator, merciless and bloodthirsty. Her proposals were like an ultimatum from a tigress, as if she was challenging him. Just dare to offer something different. He never knew the woman who sent this package. She and the lawyer she chose wanted war. She wanted war to drag him to trial and completely destroy him. This Jesse has become a ruthless, cold-blooded professional. Gary took the proposals to his lawyer, a good man, who would receive the same documents as him. The lawyer looked at them and then said quite clearly, "Mr. McGowan, she wants war. She wants to hurt you, destroy you if she can. I've seen it before. This is what happens when love turns to hate." He said, "If we refuse and fight, we will lose. Accept everything she offers. It's the best you can hope for." He added, "I know her lawyer. She hates men and loves nothing more than to trample poor men under the heels of her high boots. She's a ruthless bitch, accept the offer." He concluded, pride has nothing to do with it. Everyone finds themselves in such a situation at least once in their life. In the long run, it won't matter. Accept her offer and move on. Gary thought about it. He didn't want to give up. He wanted to fight. He wanted to force her to spend some of her precious money to engage her in a long emotional battle that would eat up some of her valuable time. In the end, he agreed with his lawyer, accept the pain, erase it from his life, and move on. Procedurally, the divorce proceeded according to plan. Deadlines were set, final signatures were agreed upon, and a completion date was set in 6 months. The reason for divorce had to be irreconcilable differences. Any mention of any other reason, and she would void the agreement, take the matter to court, and ruin him. The hint was clear. Infidelity was not something to be mentioned. Then in the middle of it all, he received a devastating call from Dorothy. "Dad," she said, "you really hurt Mom." "Why? What have I done?" He asked. "What you took," she said. "You didn't take anything your mother bought you." She got so angry that she threw out all your things, and even worse, Mom knows everything. All the things she bought you, and you didn't take any of them. You didn't even take a photo. Not a single photo of us. Oh God, Dad, I think she wanted you to take everything. Melanie thinks she might have wanted you to leave a note or a letter or something. You know, something that would give her a reason to call you or have one of us tell you to call. Dad, she cried and cried. Maybe she would change her mind. Katie thinks she wanted an excuse not to get divorced. Mary listened to his eldest daughter. Was he wrong? Should he have taken everything? Should I have left a note? He heard Dorothy finish. Dad, Mommy is in complete disarray. We are afraid. That night at the gala, Jessie initially fled the scene, but she wasn't the type to give up. Not her. In the silence of the Hampton Inn, she pondered and rethought her plans. She loved Gary desperately, but he was such a loser. She cursed herself for giving in to Snyder's exhortations and veiled threats. She was no worse than Snyder. Why did she let herself get so caught up in this? And there was this Gary. Who does he think he is? Teacher. High school teacher. And in a public school, he lost all ambition. Damn it, he never had one. She remembered his college grades, his graduate school grades, his stupid master's thesis. It was all mediocre. She remembered how she helped him, corrected his work. What a stupid project. Researching the synodic cycle of the moon to see if it affects student behavior problems. What a joke. Of course it doesn't. Where did he even get such a stupid idea? Where did this lead him? No use. She remembered every word he said on the night of the dance. He called her a woman of easy virtue. What did he even understand? He made a lot of stupid threats. Come to her office. Deal with Snyder. Threaten to expose her based on the moral standards written in her work contract. Has he gone crazy? She'll show him. And then he left. He really left. He could have stayed and fought. And when he left, he didn't take anything she bought him. He knew how much time she spent choosing the suits she bought him. And that onyx ring cost a lot of money. His leaving, and the way he did it, was nothing less than giving up everything they once had. How could he? He made her angry. She once offered to hire a housekeeper so he could pursue his doctoral work. He could have quit teaching altogether. He could do accounting. But no, he wanted to be close to the girls. Did he think she didn't want to be with them too? Of course she did, but she had ambitions. She wanted to succeed. She wanted this damn partnership. When she swore she'd get him too, she just didn't think she'd have to sleep with the biggest jerk in the office. She didn't think this idiot would get her panties. To hell with him, who cares? She would get this damn partnership. She would honor this stupid bet. And if she had to sacrifice 20 years of happiness to get it, well, so be it. Oh God, how she hated it, hated everything. Why did all this have to happen? She had a life, a family, a home, a real home, and she was destroying it all. And it was all Gary's fault. She remembered her childhood. Of course, her parents loved her. They almost never told her this, but she knew that they did. Why did they expect so much from her? Why couldn't she be like other kids? Go to sleepovers, go to parties, wear fancy clothes, date boys, have fun. Nothing she did was ever good enough, but she will show them. She will get this partnership. She'll show them all. Especially that good-for-nothing Gary. Who does he think he is? Gary tried to move on with his life, but he suffered. He had unexplained headaches, constant stomach problems, chest pains, a constant feeling of malaise, and an indescribable feeling of loneliness. He felt a sadness that he could neither describe nor fully accept. He felt completely alone, as if he had no one. He was on normal terms with his father-in-law and mother-in-law, but Jessie was their daughter. They took her side. It never mattered to him. He never explained anything, and neither did she, except that he was supposedly useless and lazy. Maybe that's how it was. His mother remained neutral. She was afraid that Jessie might alienate her from her granddaughters. Gary understood and accepted this. The mother didn't know what happened, and he didn't tell her, so she was inclined to blame him. He couldn't tell her. She could tell the girls, but he didn't want that. No matter how much he despised Jessie, she was still their mother. He was lucky with his daughters. Dorothy said that she thought she understood everything. She told her sisters that their mother was so obsessed that she was on the verge of psychosis. She believed that everyone should wait, that perhaps Jessie would come to her senses. Gary agreed. Well, what else was left? He really missed the girls. He used to see them every day, but after the breakup, contact became very limited. He missed their complaints, their grumbling, their quarrels over clothes, their demands to be there immediately when they needed something. It seemed to him that part of his body had been cut off. What actually happened? Jessie was caught, but she denied everything and then destroyed her family in order to maintain her position at work. Him, his mom, his dad, and the girls needed both, but their mother wanted this partnership. As Oliver North said, shit happens. Gary thought about dating, but honestly, there was no point. He loved his soon-to-be ex-wife and missed his old life so much that he just wasn't interested in a new relationship. He lost all interest in sex. There weren't even any illegal power dumps. Why? He had daughters. They were his life. If only he could see them more often. This was not entirely true. There were women at work, 2 of them to be exact. Sometimes he thought about one of them. Gary made a mistake. His closest work friend was a guy named Bob Bradley. Bob realized something was wrong, and Gary felt he needed to tell someone. Bob had always been very reserved about other matters, so Gary felt confident that he could trust him. She and Bob exchanged several conversations. Unfortunately, it happened in a bar Bob frequented, a place filled with remnants of other failed marriages. Gary had no idea how much grief there was in this world. Many of the poor souls he met lost not only all their material possessions, but also their sense of self-worth. For some, it revolved around revenge fantasies, but for most, it was just regret. The angry ones dominated the conversation, and when it came to what Gary should do, he heard a lot of advice. They suggested tracking down the culprits, buying some kind of automatic weapon, invading their space, and killing as many people as possible until he was stopped. It was strange. These were normal men, but they found themselves in an environment that they could not accept. It must be admitted that part of him wanted revenge, but the other, larger part, called for restraint. He remembered that he had 3 daughters, 3 angels, and he had too many good memories of a life filled with the love of a woman. In addition, he, like Dorothy, believed that Jessie was ill and needed help, and he felt that this responsibility could ultimately fall on him. How stupid it is, teachers with their rescue thinking. He and Jessie and later Dorothy once went canoeing. They took lessons and learned about what the Wheel of Death is. Several local rivers had so-called weirs, low, maybe 3 or 4 feet high waterfalls that seemed gentle at first glance. However, if you capsized while passing through such a spillway, you could find yourself caught in an endless cycle of falling water rising to the surface, only to be pulled down again and again until you drowned. Gary felt that his life had turned into the same wheel of death. Several men in the bar knew who he was, and one of them remembered his wife. The comments they made about him being a teacher made him feel uneasy. They either perceived him as too smart for them or politely despised him, believing that teachers were not very smart. None of the men in this bar were lawyers, and that gave him pause. How did people like lawyers and doctors view teachers, especially public school teachers? Did they look down on them? The teachers didn't know this because teachers usually only talk to other teachers. He wondered how Jessie's colleagues treated him. He was sure they weren't as outspoken as these guys, But he figured that in their professional circles, Jesse's colleagues probably knew how to put someone like him in his place. Especially behind his back, Gary tried to be discreet. He didn't want anyone to think he was gay when he looked at the men at the bar. None of them were what he could call a physical standard. There were several men with paunches, and only one or two looked quite athletic. He looked around and realized that sitting in this bar, he was where he was supposed to be, and it reminded him of Jesse's fellow lawyers. With the exception of the senior partners who were either skinny or downright fat, none of Jesse's colleagues looked overweight. No, they all looked good, some even very good. So all day long, Jessie would look at young and attractive men, and then she would come home and see him. Gary a little overweight, a little short, a little out of shape, maybe in wrinkled pants and a stained shirt, cooking meatloaf or whatever. Another high-calorie dish. It seemed to him that after 20 years of marriage, she could really see him as a loser, a weak person, and all those things she called him. But that didn't justify her. After all, he always did what he had to do and was always there. He may have been narcissistic, but he grew up without a father and knew what that meant. He glanced briefly back at his childhood. He remembered moments like when he became interested in the Scouts. There was a fathers and sons evening event then. Imagine being the only boy without a father at such an evening. He never became a Scout. This was just one of many such disappointments. So he may never become a school principal, a PhD, or an Indian chief, but he was always a father and was always there for it. One of the men at the bar who knew who he was commented, he said, "I saw your wife. Well, she's not that beautiful, but I can't imagine her with you." Gary asked, "What do you mean?" He replied, "She looked like she was from high society. Not hot, but definitely out of your league." What could he say? Yeah, I guess so. But he stopped listening and turned his attention to another guy who was angry that New England might get to the Super Bowl again. Gary believed it was true. Jesse had worked hard and made it to the major leagues while he was stuck in the minors. Was he such a loser? Maybe, maybe not. But this was his last visit to this bar. What bothered Gary as much as anything else was that he thought Jessie had lost her sense of perspective, or more accurately, she had lost touch with reality. He wasn't sure if that was even the right expression. Since he had known her, she had always been tense like a taut string. The slightest thing could unsettle her. A low grade in an insignificant subject, a small stain on her clothes. One day, she threw away a perfectly good white blouse because she noticed a stain on it. After she left, he took it out of the trash, washed it, and the stain disappeared. She came home, saw the blouse, and threw it away again. For her, this thing no longer had any value. Gary realized that over time, he himself had become like that blouse to her. He swore to himself that next time he would not allow this to happen. He then vowed that there would be no next time. Millions of men live alone, just like millions of women. Does he need Jessie? No. Does she need him? He figured she would find out, and if not, she could always hire a housekeeper. Returning to Bob, Gary learned that teachers are terrible gossips. He found a way to identify gossip. He had to tell a meaningless story to only one teacher. If it spread, he knew who not to trust. Bob had always been reliable, but this time word spread, and soon everyone was giving him sympathetic glances. There was one woman at work, a biology teacher, Caroline Campaneris. She was new to teaching, but at 31, she was not young. She said teaching was her second career. At the beginning of the year, she was having discipline problems, and her department chair, being a useless jerk, wasn't helpful, so Gary quietly offered to help. After several failed attempts, she managed to take control of her classes. One of the big problems in his school district was how classes were distributed. Although the director always had the last word, department heads made their own suggestions. Gary always took on the hardest and easiest classes and distributed the rest based on the teacher's ability, attendance, and cooperation. But the head of the Department of Natural Sciences always took the best classes for herself and distributed the remaining good ones among her friends. Therefore, new biology teachers always received the worst grades. This is what happened to Caroline. Poor Caroline, when he helped her, they stayed after school several times to discuss problems. He told her about his wife and 3 daughters. She told him about her mother and how her father disappeared. Judging by her words, he realized that she never had a real life. Her mother was ill, and her father, after what Caroline described as heroic efforts, gave up and abandoned them when Caroline was 15. Since then, she took care of her mother, lived on government benefits, finished school, worked as a bank teller, and studied evening classes. Gary liked Caroline. She was an attractive woman, petite, about 5'2" 157 centimeters tall, with short brown hair, brown eyes, a nice figure, nice legs, and small feet, and she had a slightly cheeky demeanor. Sometimes when they talked, he caught thinking about what it would be like to kiss her. She had a beautiful heart-shaped face and a strikingly beautiful, tiny heart-shaped mouth with bright red lips. Before December, he had never tried to take advantage of the situation. But after the winter gala and the subsequent weeks of loneliness in January and February, he sometimes thought about Caroline. He never said anything, because his girls always came first. And he still foolishly hoped that Jesse would come to his senses. He was not looking for reconciliation, only a slight release in the relationship to make life easier for the children. In Gary's old house, the girls began to have problems with their mother. She was busy with her career and her affairs. The girls said that sometimes she brought men home, but they never stayed overnight. Gary was sure that Jesse knew that the girls were sharing all the information with him. Dorothy became his main source of information. She turned into a real detective. She hacked her mother's phone. She activated her own GPS program and could track every place Jesse went and probably who she met, and she made sure to share it with her father. Moreover, Dorothy maintained regular contact with one of Jesse's subordinates, a secretary, who kept her informed of everything. Jesse seemed to be running in circles. The more she worked, the more responsibilities her partners gave her. According to Dorothy, Jesse worked harder than ever. Senior partners delayed choosing new partners, and this affected Jesse's well-being. She worked more hours, made more money, and according to friend Dorothy, made more enemies than ever. Gary tried to call or text Jesse a couple of times. Each time, Jesse's lawyer sent him a certified letter warning him that if he continued to try to contact her client, there would be serious consequences. He stopped trying. Meanwhile, after weeks of suffering in a small apartment, he put down a deposit on another house, a neat 4-room house with a foyer in the suburbs. He purchased a new firearm and planned to use it in the fall. Tools, machine tools, saws, carpenter saws, hammers, pliers, axes, even a chainsaw, all this could be easily purchased. He lost Daisy, his dog, who was still alive but far from him, so he adopted another Labrador through an animal rescue. He hoped that he would have time to prepare him for the hunt in the fall. Gary's mother now worked part-time, so she visited him on weekdays to help with his new house. Despite the loneliness, things began to look up. When Gary staged his home, he created an office in the basement and furnished it with the same leather furniture he had in his old house. In the largest bedroom, he also reproduced the previous furnishings and left the remaining bedrooms for the girls. Each of the daughters received their own room and could decide for themselves how to furnish it. Melanie said it drove her mom crazy. She thought it was funny. With a new house, he now had a place for the girls to stay on his allotted weekends, and with a small sailboat, as well as the new motorboat he had bought, there was plenty to do. They didn't interfere if they wanted to invite girlfriends or boyfriends. That was even better. Dorothy said that when Jesse found out about this, she was very angry. Gary had to correct her tongue. He had never been one to seek revenge, but the thought of Jesse being home alone every other Sunday in the big house, she wanted to soothe him a little. True, she was not always alone. The girls said she sometimes brought a friend. They said they didn't think she slept with any of them, but all three mentioned how handsome the men were, how they couldn't keep their hands off her, and how she let them touch her. Over time, he stopped caring. She was free from him, and if she wanted to act like an easy woman, that was her business. What does that poem say? Time heals all wounds. Jesse's betrayal and hatred did hurt in the beginning, but every day it hurt him less and less. He spent a lot of time on YouTube listening to old music. There was an old Oak Ridge Boys song, "Sometimes it doesn't hurt to hurt sometimes." There was a line in this song, "You try to hold on to the moment, but time won't let you stay. And for every step you take, you lose something on the way. You try to hold on to the moment, but time won't let you stay. And every step of the way, you lose something along the way." He still loved his soon-to-be ex-wife, but every day the pain became more and more bearable. Gary thought he would be okay, but something was still missing. It was something he couldn't clearly define, but the feeling never left him. Every day at work, he saw Carolyn, the biology teacher he helped in the fall. She always looked so attractive. Her hair was styled perfectly. She had big brown eyes and damn attractive lips, so red as if made for kissing. On Thursday in April, a week before spring break, Carolyn walked into his office. In the fall, he found time during sixth period. It was a day with 7 lessons, and her last class consisted of a bunch of mischievous boys. He would sometimes drop by just to say hello and see how she was coping. Gary was busy checking documents when he heard a light knock on his office door. He immediately knew it was Caroline because he heard her voice. "Mr. McGowan, are you there?" She had the sweetest voice, so soft with a slight melody like Jessie's when she wasn't screaming. He stood up and opened the door to see Carolyn wearing a cream linen V-neck blouse, a dark brown pleated miniskirt, and brown heels. He hadn't hugged or kissed a woman in months, and she stood there holding a plastic container in her hands. She said, "Can I come in?" He stepped aside to let her in and replied, "Of course." She smelled like lavender. He invited her to sit next to his table while he remained standing. "What can I do for you?" he asked. She sat down and crossed her legs. She was wearing flesh-colored nylon stockings. It looked like they were tights. The skirt was short and she had nice hips. He could see her breasts through the cut of her blouse. She was wearing a bra with lace trim. It seemed that he was sitting freely and comfortably. He saw more than he should have. He sat down on the chair opposite and asked, "Are you all right?" She smiled. She had dazzling white teeth. She said, "Yes, and thank you very much for your help. I don't know how I would have coped without you." He didn't say anything. Carolyn held up the container and said, "I baked a cake for Mom last night and thought you might like a piece. It's a vanilla cake with coconut frosting." She opened the container and showed it to him. He looked at the cake and said, "It looks delicious. Will you be offended if I save it for later?" "I just had lunch." His lunch consisted of 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Her chest moved as she handed him the cake. She sighed and her breasts moved again under her blouse. The blouse was slightly see-through. She said, "There's a plastic fork there for when you decide to eat it. I hope you like coconut." He replied, "Yes, I do." Then they just sat there in silence, both not knowing what to say. She continued to smile. Her arms rested on the sides of her body, and this made her breasts press harder against the thin fabric of her blouse. It seemed that they were about to break free. It was hard for him not to look. Her eyes were so big. She had long eyelashes. She was wearing barely any makeup, and her lips looked dewy and red. They seemed to be slightly pressed together, as if they were waiting for a kiss. Finally, he asked, "Do you have any plans for spring break?" She automatically touched her blouse near the buttons. Her breasts moved again. He felt embarrassed. She replied, "Yes, me and a few friends booked tickets on a cruise ship. We're going to the Bahamas. Have you ever been there?" He remembered that he and his wife once went there. It was a gift trip from her company for good work. He remembered trying to keep track of how many pina coladas Jessie drank in one day. He had to constantly apply lotion to her skin because she was very fair-skinned and burned easily. He noticed that Caroline's skin was fair too. Jessie had been particularly bossy throughout this trip, and he had to put up with it because she constantly reminded him that the company was paying for their vacation. Thinking about it now, he knew he should have left her there in the sun on that sun lounger, gone to the bar and let her burn. He remembered that men looked at Jessie back then, and she knew it. But there were also women who looked at him. Did he doubt that Jessie saw it? He had never been fat, nor was he particularly muscular, but he knew he looked proportionate. Jessie looked like a model. His cruise was supposed to be some kind of romantic adventure, but it was real torture. They argued about everything. Gary told Caroline, "Yes, I was in the Bahamas. We used Royal Caribbean." She clasped her hands in front of her. She clapped her hands softly and said, "Oh, those are the ones we chose. Were they good?" "The best," he said. Then they just looked at each other for a few seconds again. Finally, she looked at her watch, gold and expensive looking, which was wrapped neatly around her wrist, and said, "Oh, I have to go. I have a lesson soon. These robbers, you know." He grinned. Oh yeah, they called her last-class bandits. She leaned forward to stand, and he stood up too. They were very close to each other. Both were silent. Then she said, "Well, I have to go." "Enjoy your cake," and turned to leave. He watched her walk away. Slender legs. They looked toned, not muscular, but slender. Her skirt swayed as she walked away. She had a beautiful figure. He returned to his desk and looked at the cake. Maybe he should go out more often. He thought about Caroline Campaneris. She probably had a regular boyfriend. More than anything, Gary loved his daughters. Dorothy, as the eldest, always took on the most responsibility. He was worried about Dorothy, but not as much as he was about Katie and Melanie. Katie was still very immature. He was glad that Dorothy cared for her like a second mother. Melanie was the one that bothered him the most. She was their middle daughter, and he read about middle children. He and Jesse tried their best not to deprive Melanie of attention, but she was different. He wished he could find a way to fully understand her, but she was so mysterious. He monitored her grades, checked with her teachers. Everything seemed fine. But still, she was his daughter. He wanted her to be happy, to feel protected and loved. What was wrong with Melanie? One day she was getting ready for a party. She walked into the living room where she and Jesse were watching the news and warned him that she was going to a party where there would be older guys and alcohol, but not to worry because she wasn't interested. Gary remembered how he felt a chill inside him, and the look on Jesse's face showed that she felt something similar. Why did Melanie say this? She could lie and they wouldn't suspect anything. One day, Gary decided to check out Dorothy's car. He wanted to change the oil, add gas, and maybe clean out the inside. Big mistake. He looked inside and found a full package of pregnancy protection products under the passenger seat. Wow, he was shocked. He went home and told Jessie about it. She laughed and said it belonged to Melanie. It seemed to calm him down. Then she explained that Melanie and her friends were handing them out at the mall. Jesus, he thought then, this will definitely give Dad a heart attack. He was worried about all his daughters. Until recently, he thought he understood Jessie well enough, but sometime in the fall, her obsession became too obvious. Her career and relentless drive to be the best, especially in her legal work, have completely taken over her life. Jessie, like many people, has always had problems with self-esteem, but now it has become a real obsession. Gary read a lot and learned that Jessie was one of those people who perceived success as relative failure and failure as complete disaster. Psychologists, he read, called this catastrophism. The slightest mistake for such people was unforgivable. It was completely irrational. He believed that Jessie had come to the conclusion that in order to be even on par, she had to be 10 times better. Gary was sure that the senior partners were feeding her small doses of conditional recognition in order to keep her on the treadmill, forcing her to run faster and faster. This, combined with perhaps a sense of guilt for her behavior, made her life a living hell. He wanted to know more, but the only way to find out was to talk to her. And that was the problem. She didn't talk to him, but he was working on it. He needed to understand what was on her mind. If she didn't talk to him, maybe she would have shared it with the girls. He got together with his daughters and discussed it. The girls came to his new house. He said, "Girls, I want you to do something for me." Melanie looked at him as if she already knew what he was asking. "Dad, you want us to talk to Mom?" She found out what was in her head. He replied, "Well said, can you do this?" Katie said, "Come on, she barely talks to us. She thinks that everything she tells us will immediately become known to you." This is exactly what I need. I want to know everything you can find out, write down everything you can, and then maybe I can understand it. "It's really mean," Dorothy said. "I agree with Dorothy, Dad," Katie added. "It would seem to me that I was faking it." "No," Melanie said. "This is exactly what needs to be done. We need to find out as much as we can from her, and then all 4 of us can decide what to do next." She looked first at Katie, then at Dorothy. "Mom is sick. Dad wants to help her." Dorothy looked at her father. "Aren't you asking us to find out Mom's secret so we can use it against her?" Melanie raised her voice, almost shouted, "Dorothy, Dad is not like that." He was also surprised. "No, absolutely. I may be going down a stupid path, but she is your mother, and for a little while longer. She is still my wife. I still love that stupid woman. You mean you want to reconcile?" Asked Dorothy. He replied, "That's too strong a word, my dear. For now, I just want to help her get back on track." "It will be difficult to get that from Mom," Melanie commented. "I would give anything for it if it happened." Katie said. "We'll have to do this at home," Dorothy remarked. Thus it was decided. They agreed to arrange something in a week. Gary came into the house and installed listening equipment in the kitchen, living room, and office. That very day has come. It was one of her resurrections. She never planned anything, so it wasn't hard for the girls to start a conversation. But it all turned out to be a disaster. He forgot that girls are still children, huh, Jessie? Well, Jessie was who she was. They sat down at the kitchen table, and Dorothy was the first to speak. "Mom, we're worried about you and Dad." Jessie exploded. "Oh, so this is the conversation we should have while you girls tape everything? And then sit down with your dad and talk about what we said. Tell me where the recording device is. I want to speak clearly so that you and your father understand loud and clear." With childlike naivety, Katie asked, "How did you know?" Jessie's response was quick and to the point. "Girls, do you really think I'm that stupid? It may be illegal, but I was at your father's house. I'm listening to him." She must have started looking for the listening device because she said, "Are you listening, asshole?" Then she returned to the girls. "This stupid bastard thinks he's smarter than me. Dorothy, where's the monitor? I know he's here somewhere." One of them must have pointed to the top of the refrigerator, because everything Jessie said after that was so clear that Gary knew she had found him, and she didn't hold back. "Listen, asshole, you're not smart enough to beat me. I know you want reconciliation. Well, I'll tell you what." She started screaming, "I'll tell you what you can do about your reconciliation. I'll tell you." But she never finished. She got up and went into the office. The next day, Gary picked up the tapes. He heard her crying. He later realized that she had never answered her question. She had said neither yes nor no regarding reconciliation. He wondered why and why he still cared. So the recording plan didn't work out, but Dorothy's birthday was just around the corner. Gary had another idea. He thought, what if he and the girls did something that would force Jessie to participate? Maybe they can bring her back to reality. Gary and the girls planned a party at one of her favorite restaurants, Napoli. Jessie's favorite Italian dish was lasagna, and Napoli served the most delicious one. Another thing Jessie was obsessed with was how girls should look. It was always 3 girls and a mother in the same outfits. Dorothy would talk her mom into wearing a particularly cute blue dress, and the girls would go to Nordstrom and buy 3 dresses to match the look. Everything would be ready. Dresses, food, everything. Gary's appearance would have been a planned accidental event. He would suddenly appear right after they placed the order. They would seat her at the table, and the girls would show their charm. Circumstances at Jessie's work were tense. Gary didn't know how tense until he saw it for himself. The critical moment that showed how bad things happened immediately after the conflict, with the girls in her house. Jessie was firmly convinced that the girls and her so-called lazy husband were up to something. So when Katie approached her with a proposal for a restaurant, she knew where it was going. She knew Gary was using GPS to track her. She did the same to him. She knew about his house, about his new tools and purchase of firearms. She even knew what kind of furniture he bought, but she completely missed one important fact. She forgot that her house was still bugged. With Dorothy and Melanie nearby in the dining room, Kathy walked up to her mother and said, "Mom, you know Dorothy's birthday is in a week." "Yes, dear, I know," was Jessie's casual response. Katie stammered, "Maybe we could go somewhere. Maybe the 4 of us, you and us, could go out to dinner." Jessie's antennae shot up. "Was this another trap?" "Yes," she replied. "That sounds like a good idea." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Dorothy and Melanie. They listened to her every word. Katie added, "Just the 4 of us, no one else." "You mean without fathers?" Jessie answered, groping. Melanie and Dorothy walked into the kitchen, nodding toward Dorothy. Melanie interjected, "Hey, we overheard dinner for Dorothy's birthday." What a great idea. And then Dorothy took a step that became unnecessary. "Mom, can I invite Dad too?" Jessie's suspicions were confirmed, and she exploded. "We couldn't just be the 4 of us. Could we?" The cauldron began to boil. "You know how I feel about him. He may be your father, and I know you love him, but I can't. Everything came out. This lazy scoundrel, treacherous, schemer, son of a bitch. He's the one who put you up to it. God, how I hate him." The frightened girls unconsciously stepped back. Jessie's filter went off. At school teacher. This teacher, a man of his talents, should be running his own business. He could open his own tax firm or accounting office. Dorothy tried to intervene, Mom. Don't call me Mom. Jessie was beside herself. You are all on his side. He's the one who put you up to it. Do you have any idea how much he annoys me? He drives me crazy. Why can't he be, well, what I want him to be? She began to sob, cry, and scream. She grabbed the nearest coffee cup and threw it at the wall. The cup broke, scattering into hundreds of pieces. The girls retreated even further from the room. Jessie was no longer aware of anything. Screaming into the void, she continued, "Look at his clothes. What he wears is a disgrace. I bought him nice things, but he wears the same old worn-out and wrinkled rags. I spent a lot of money on decent clothes for him. All I had to do was go and try them on. But not him. For him, everything is always from cheap sales. I hate him. At my work, people like Snyder wear $3,000 suits and still look like complete idiots. If your father wore suits like these, he'd look like George Clooney, compared to Michael. More, all he ever did was embarrass me. Why does he always have to humiliate me?" The girls waited in the dining room with bated breath as their mother, consumed with her anger, continued her tirade. "It's getting worse at work. There's too much work. I need this partner position. But the more I work, the further away it gets from me. I hate this place. I hate Snyder and his pathetic minions. They hang around my desk all the time." She grabbed her head and started pulling her hair. "I'm so tired of all this. From their vile grins. I'm sick of Snyder's greasy innuendos and his mean-spirited innuendos. The secretaries know something has happened. I saw their sly smiles." She suffocated. She looked around. I realized that I had gone too far. She sat down at the kitchen table, trying to pull herself together. She smiled at the girls, who were still awkwardly standing in the dining room and leaning on the doorframe separating the kitchen and dining room, smiled discreetly. "Yes, of course. Let's go have dinner. Just the four of us." Katie said, "Of course, Mom. We will arrange everything." They moved out of their mother's sight. Gary couldn't stop thinking about Caroline, the biology teacher. She and Carolyn became very close. They often stopped to chat in the hallway. One day he bought her a set of pens and pencils and secretly left it in her mailbox. He noticed that she was not wearing a wedding ring. In the conversation, he casually mentioned how he liked women with short hair, and a couple of days later she came to work with a bob. He told her how much he liked her new haircut, and she blushed. But Jessie was still in his thoughts. He heard that recording. Her hysteria in front of the girls was terrible. He heard more than just Jessie's tirade. He heard the girls' reactions when they ran away from the house. They almost immediately arrived at his home. They jumped into Dorothy's car and drove straight to his place. The girls were counting on him to do something. He chose Thursday to come to town and meet Jessie, because he had read that Thursday was considered the quietest day of the week. He parked in the lot opposite her office and walked inside. The company occupied several floors, but he knew that it operated on the fourth. Coming out of the elevator, he was greeted by the receptionist sitting at the counter. Everything was open, and behind her, he saw 3 long rows of tables, 12 tables in each row. Around these tables, at which employees spoke quietly, were office doors. Every door was signed with the name of some lawyer. He didn't know which door his wife's office was behind, so he approached the receptionist and asked where he could find her. The receptionist smiled and politely asked first his name and then the purpose of the visit. He watched as she used the intercom to inform Jessie that she had a potential client. The receptionist suddenly turned off the intercom and picked up the phone. Gary watched as she listened, looked at him and muttered, several times. Finally, she hung up and asked him to sit down, telling him that Mrs. McGowan would be free. In a minute, it was around 2:30 p.m., Gary sat there until 4 p.m. when the receptionist received another call and told him that Mrs. McGowan was ready to see him and that he needed to go to the Gall, 5th room on the right. Gary thanked her and walked down the corridor. Approaching the door, he knocked and entered. There she was, wearing dark glasses and a dark blue business suit with a bright white button-down shirt. Her hair was pulled back into a formal bun, but it looked a little disheveled. She had that lawyer's face. He took a step forward. He was determined to be as businesslike as she was. "Can we talk for a few minutes?" "I promise I won't take up much of your time." She pointed him to a chair and he sat down. Looking at him over her glasses, she said, "I assume you want to discuss our conversation with the girls the other day." "They were really upset," he said. She looked him up and down. "New suit," and added, "Weren't the ones I bought you good enough?" "Yes," he replied. Then he added, No. Yes, it's a new suit, but yes, those suits you bought me were good too." She pulled up her glasses, straightened a few papers, pushed her chair back a little, and crossed her legs. "What I accidentally said to the girls also bothers me. We were planning something for Dorothy's birthday when suddenly your name was mentioned. This took me by surprise, as everyone knows you shouldn't come near me." After a pause, she added, "You didn't take any of the things I bought you." Gary replied, "I didn't know you had some kind of order forbidding me from seeing you." And after another awkward pause, he added, "Yeah, I guess I should have brought a couple of suits." She put her hand to her temple. "I haven't submitted anything yet, but maybe I will soon. My lawyer already told you to stay away, right? I thought you understood this, but I see that you don't." She looked at him reproachfully and added, "I always liked the gray stripes on you. Jesse," he said, "the girls are worried about you." Then, as if remembering, he added, "Forget about the suits. I'm sure you know all about it," she replied. Completely missing the point of the conversation, he asked, "What are you talking about?" By this point, already thinking only about the costumes, she said irritably, "Oh, forget it about it." Gary felt that the conversation had reached a dead end. He started to get up. "Looks like I'm wasting my time." She looked at him and for the first time truly looked into his eyes. "No, please stay a little longer." He sat down again. She looked at him as if she wanted to say something, but then that determination disappeared. After a few seconds, she looked away. "Forget it. I'll talk to the girls about something." He was about to leave again, but hesitated for a second. He looked at her, and for a moment he wanted to say something truly important, but her face again became cold as stone. "Thank you," he said, and walked out the door. In the common room, he noticed that most people had stopped working. Everyone looked at him, pretending not to look. He saw Jeffrey Snyder for a moment. Their gazes crossed. In the fluorescent light, Snyder didn't seem all that attractive. Sallow complexion, thinning hair, bloated appearance. Gary looked back at his wife's office door. She stood and looked at him. He had mixed feelings. He lost weight. He began to spend more time in the fresh air, and he knew that he looked good. He looked healthy. She looked sad. Oh, how people and their choices change. Did she see the difference? Gary walked down the corridor, through the reception area, got into the elevator, went down to the first floor, and left the building. Gary remembered the men from the bar. This is exactly what they felt regret as something dear to their hearts dies. He felt a deep, dark emptiness in his chest, black and cruel as midnight. The big day came when the girls and Jesse were supposed to get together, but at the last moment, Jesse canceled everything. They later learned that the senior partners sent Jesse to New York. Her career ruined everything. The girls were almost ready to give up. One day, he came into the house while Jesse was at work and took away a gray suit. Spring was approaching, and with it came a new wave of school events. There were dances, lacrosse, and baseball games and parties. Jesse missed most of them, but Gary tried to attend almost all of them. He used to coach the junior lacrosse team at a local high school, but gave it up because he knew his girls needed more of his attention. Melanie played baseball, although not very well. Dorothy was a mediocre lacrosse player, but little Catherine played midfielder on the junior varsity team. Whether they won or lost, played well or not, the girls always supported each other, and Gary was satisfied with that. One day, Jessie finally came to watch Melanie play, and there was a man with her. Dorothy and Katie saw them and carefully avoided them. Jessie and her date left early, but not before she delivered one of her signature performances. Again, Gary knew the girls were disappointed in their mother. She acted like she didn't care. They watched as Melanie wasn't playing very well as Jessie and her date began to climb up the stands. He was young, tall, and attractive. Too young, too tall, and too attractive for her. Gary felt bad about the idea that this guy might be sleeping with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Jessie was wearing dark blue trousers. She held a beige sweater on her arm. Her chest was covered by an expensive white blouse with the top buttons undone. She walked through the stands radiating sensuality in every step. Gary's mouth was dry. She was still the one he wanted. She was sitting next to Katie when Jessie leaned forward and kissed Katie on the cheek. She didn't look at him, but he knew from the look on her face that she knew how he felt. He hated her. She was his, but she threw everything they had down the drain. He might still crave her, but he could never forgive her. Dorothy's spy at the law firm, Jesse, kept feeding them all sorts of information, some of which was very disturbing. One day, a spy reported that Jesse's relationship with at least one of the senior partners had become strained, which affected her relationships with other partners. It seemed to Gary that Jesse had become an outsider in her company. He suggested that information about her incident with Snyder might have leaked, and if so, he was interested in how the partners reacted to it. On the other hand, the girls noticed that Jessie was increasingly staying at work until late in the evening. And recently, she hadn't even come home at all, several times. What Dorothy found out was that Jessie had rented an apartment just a few blocks from her office. She became so immersed in work that she began to neglect her home and girls. To make matters worse, their secret informant reported that Jessie's workload had increased so much that it was unbearable. She spent too much time at work, began missing appointments, and her spy believed she was taking some kind of stimulant or medication. Twice the spy claimed he found Jessie asleep at her desk. It seemed to Gary that one or more of the senior partners was playing a game against his almost ex-wife. Perhaps they had a change of heart about her partnership. If so, then Jessie's life was just beginning to turn into hell. Gary decided it was time to either get involved or step aside. For the sake of his daughters, he decided to intervene. He took a few days off again and spied Jessie in the city center. He managed to find her rented apartment. It was just 1 block from her law firm. Accuse him of being a spy, but he needed to get into this apartment. He talked to Dorothy, and she stole Jessie's keys from her purse while she was sleeping. Dorothy went to the nearest locksmith and made duplicates of all the keys. Gary came downtown several mornings and kept an eye on Jessie. Mostly, she returned home straight away, but sometimes she went into her rented apartment. One morning, when she was staying overnight at the center, he snuck inside. He felt like James Bond. He explored everything he could. I opened her small refrigerator. There wasn't much there, mostly yogurt. He looked in the kitchen cabinets, nothing. Then he carefully entered the bathroom and bingo! Our first aid kit was filled with small containers. He found Advil, nothing special, but there were other medicines. There were pills and other things that he had never seen before. He took one of each and checked the prescriptions and doctors' names. God Almighty, the prescriptions were written out in different names. She used her maiden name, and one of the recipes had his mother's name on it. Did his mother know about this? He thought that such drugs were carefully controlled, but apparently if you have money, you can get anything. He returned to the main room and examined her bed. He found her sex toy under the bed. Surprisingly, Jessie bought herself a punching bag. There were small leather gloves on the floor, and a photograph of an old man was glued to the top of the pair. Gary realized that this was the face of one of the senior partners, so she wanted to beat the old man. He thought that maybe things were starting to fall into place. He wanted to know more. However, it was not the bathroom or the bed that struck him most. This was her small desk. There were tissues everywhere, as if they had been used not to wipe the nose or other parts of the body, but to wipe away tears. He guessed she cried that much. What else could they be needed for? After all these wipes couldn't just be for intimate hygiene. Besides, they were too far from the bed. Her desk was littered with papers. There was room for a laptop or tablet, but he assumed she was taking them with her. Everything was in disarray. Some of the paperwork was work-related, but most of it seemed personal nonsense, he thought, at first until he looked more closely. What were these papers? It was terrible. His stomach twisted like he was on a roller coaster. He urgently wanted to drink Coca-Cola or take heartburn pills. There were stacks of scraps of paper, mostly scraps, torn and crumpled, and what was written on them. His name was on most of them, and next to his name were written different words, such as grief, suffering, despair, loneliness, shame, regret, pain, death, and hatred. Anger and punishment were also found. When one piece of paper was written low, many times in a row, and then surrender, die. Other scraps linked his name with words like boring, coward, loser, weak-willed, weakling. There were also phrases such as come back, fix everything, and love me, need me. On some scraps, one could also find the words love, fear, help. One of the sheets was covered with the children's names, Melanie, Dorothy, Catherine, and under their names, the word mine was written over and over again. On another piece of paper, there was only the word help, written dozens of times. And on one large piece of paper was his name written in bold letters, and around it, the word need was repeated over and over again. He realized that her innermost feelings lay before him. There were even a few poems there. Some he recognized as poems she had written in high school and early in their marriage. These were all love poems. He reread them all. He wondered how many times Gary's name could be inserted into one love poem. Some were quite strange. One poem was a long series of different variations of his name, written in different styles. There were other poems, sonnets that she had probably read and memorized in college. He remembered how she took many literature classes as a student. There were other names on these pieces of paper. One name came up frequently, Jeffrey Snyder, but his name was accompanied by other words, damn bastard, kill. Gary thought that maybe Snyder was causing problems at her job. And then he thought, well, of course, Snyder was causing her trouble. It was obvious. Gary couldn't help but admit that he felt a deep sense of sadness. Here she is, Jessie, in her small apartment, which has become her hideout, her safe place. He thought about it a lot, and came to the conclusion that this is a manifestation of her obsessive desire to succeed, to achieve something more, and at the same time the awareness that people around are trying to destroy her. Whatever the reasons, her ambitions, or her feelings of guilt, it destroyed her. His heart was breaking. She needed him. She needed help, and he knew it. He needed to be there to support her. Of course, he was still bothered by her infidelities. But despite everything, she remained the mother of his children, his wife. They may have been on the verge of divorce, but they were still connected. He still believed that if not reconciliation, some kind of settlement was necessary at least, for the sake of their daughters. Gary began to realize that perhaps he was being foolish by following his wife. Some might say he's stalking her. But he continued anyway. He had a day off on Good Friday. He usually finished work around 3:30 p.m., but since it was a holiday, he had the day off. He parked near Jessie's office and watched her leave work. Her office was in an area of the city that was fairly safe during the day, but at night, things became much more tense. However, Jessie didn't leave the office until 6:30 or 7 p.m., so Gary remained in the car, waiting patiently. While he waited, Gary thought back to the events of the week. On Monday, he kissed Carolyn, the science teacher, and couldn't get it out of his head. Then there was Tuesday, when he worried that perhaps too much had happened too quickly. On Wednesday, he did something he promised himself he would never do. He went into the staff room where Carolyn was. It was free time for both of them, and he couldn't help but take this chance to see her. The staff room was full of people. Some fell silent when they noticed his appearance, but most simply ignored him. Carolyn sat in the center of the room, talking with her colleagues. She looked at him and smiled, greeting him with her eyes, but continued the conversation. Gary took a chair in the corner of the room and sat down, watching her. Carolyn was sitting at the table. Everyone was talking about something, but Gary wasn't really following the conversation. He watched Carolyn. She looked beautiful in a dark blue dress, as if she was going on a date. Gary wondered if she had arranged a date. She decided to ignore him. He felt uneasy at the thought. Everyone continued talking. Carolyn was usually silent, at least in faculty meetings. But suddenly she said something that Gary didn't hear, and one of the men, Mr. Johnson, a man he didn't particularly respect because of his constant absenteeism, raised his voice and said, "You don't know what you're talking about." Carolyn's face turned pale. She shook her head slightly, muttered something, and put her hands on her knees. Johnson used his deep voice and loud tone to get her to back down, and Gary didn't like it. He stood up and sat down at the table. He didn't know what the conversation was about, but he was unpleasantly surprised. He interrupted and said, "I don't know, but I'd like to hear what Miss Campaneris had to say." Everyone fell silent. Johnson chuckled and said, "She has nothing to say." Johnson looked strange, maybe a little scared. Gary knew the guy was a jerk, so he said, "No, I want to hear what she had to say." One of the women looked around, nodded, and said, "Yes, me too." The others nodded too. Johnson cheekily turned to Carolyn and said, "So, Miss Campaneris, what do you say?" She responded, "We were talking about racial injustice, and I was going to say..." Johnson, who was black, interrupted her again. "How can you know anything about injustice? You are white." Gary interrupted him again. No, you're wrong, Mr. Johnson. Miss Campaneris is not only white, she is Italian. And Italians have suffered a lot of injustice too. Johnson responded, yes, but it's not the same as black people. Gary interrupted again. Yes, we all know Jim Crow and slavery before that. Only the Native Americans had it worse. But I think Miss Campaneris, has a right to her opinion, and she has a right to express it. Gary then added, don't you? Johnson responded, of course she has an opinion, and she's entitled to it. But we've heard it all before. He looked around the room, and no one said a word, so he continued. Besides, why are you here? Because the teacher's room, you are the head of the department. And any word you say here is perceived as a demonstration of your power, and this is dishonest. Gary nodded. You're right, and I'm not going to stay. I just came by to see Miss Campaneris. We spoke briefly on Monday, and I was afraid I might have said something that upset her. He looked back, and noticing the reaction, realized that he might have crossed the line. But he didn't back down. He looked at Carolyn and said, I hope I didn't upset you on Monday. If so, I apologize. In response, he saw one of the most beautiful smiles he had ever seen, and she said, no, Mr. McGowan, you didn't upset me. In fact, I was afraid that perhaps I had somehow embarrassed you myself. Gary was happy. She looked so beautiful in that blue dress that he blushed when looked at Mr. Johnson and said, you are right about what you said about racial prejudice. Our society is sick. I just wanted to say that the only way to combat this is to train more black intellectuals, more black scientists and leaders. I think success breeds respect and breaks down the walls of ignorance and bias. She was amazing, and she wasn't alone. Mrs. Freeman, an older black woman and outspoken activist for racial justice and women's rights, said, Carolyn is right, and it is our job as teachers to prepare the scientists and intellectuals of the future. She glanced at Johnson and added, but we have to be here every day to do that, don't we? Mr. Johnson? Johnson muttered something about personal matters, but Gary was no longer listening. He was looking at Caroline. She looked at him. Her hair was cut short, with one curl escaping and falling over her right eye, and she looked incredibly sexy. He wanted to straighten this curl, but he did not dare. He looked at his watch. Oh, I have to go. Caroline also looked at her watch. Oh, me too. I have a lesson. They left together. Gary was sure their departure had sparked discussion. When they were alone in the hallway, they both smiled at each other. Gary wanted to tell her how beautiful she was, but he couldn't find the words. He felt like a schoolboy. She did not experience such difficulties. Can I come by tomorrow? He smiled and said, I'll be glad. They went in different directions. He felt like he was floating in the clouds. So Good Friday. Gary checked his watch. The sun was setting, and he assumed Jesse would be getting off work soon. Memories returned to yesterday, to Maundy Thursday in sixth period. He was alone in his office again when he heard Caroline's soft knock. He called, yes. Her voice came from outside. It's me. Can I come in? The door was not locked, but he stood up and walked towards it. They were face to face, and she whispered, thank you for yesterday. He replied, please. They stood looking at each other for what seemed like hours. She was wearing an open-necked white blouse with the top two buttons undone, three-quarter length sleeves, and a light brown miniskirt. Her hair was pulled back. Gary asked, did you bring anything? She looked at him, her gaze piercing. She looked up at him. He could look right into her blouse. Those familiar tense emotions washed over him again. She whispered, only me. They kissed for a few seconds until she turned away and whispered, I'm not like that. You're leaving next week, he whispered. She looked at him, her eyes sparkling. They had sex. I need to leave. She rushed to the door and quickly left the office. Gary stood. What has he done? She will be humiliated. He ruined everything. He walked around the office back and forth. Good Friday, it was getting too dark outside to pretend he was reading, so Gary closed the book. He thought again about what had happened to Carolyn, about what he had done. He ruined her day, her week, maybe even her career, as he left her office building and headed down the street to her apartment. Her head was filled with thoughts. Mr. Church called her to his place after dinner. He said that while her partners appreciated her dedication, they had decided to delay selecting new partners. He offered no explanation. What he said after that was devastating to her. She replayed this conversation in her head over and over again as she walked towards her apartment. He stood up from the table and invited her to sit next to him on the sofa. Mr. Church was the most senior partner. His office was huge, and the word lavish would not be enough to describe it. He had a corner office with large picture windows, a massive mahogany desk, and a long conference table that could seat at least 12 people. He invited her to sit on the sofa, took off his jacket, and loosened his tie. What did he tell her? "We know how hard you work, Mrs. McGowan. Several of our lawyers can't stop singing your praises." Mr. Snyder was especially generous with his praise for your efforts. Then he stopped smiling and paused. She replied, "I'm glad, Mr. Church. I want to be the best. I'm sure the partners understand this, and if I am offered to become a partner, I will only make the firm even more successful." It was then that he discovered the true purpose of this meeting. "Yes, I think so. But, Jesse," he switched to her name, something partners didn't usually do. "There's more to a successful partnership than just hard work and responsibility. We like to think that we are more than a team. We are like a family, and families share with each other." Jesse saw this gesture and understood everything. "I want to do the best I can, Mr. Church. I want to be part of the team, part of the family." He smiled a predatory smile. This was the decisive moment, and she knew it, Mr. Church. And then maybe a couple of other senior partners to become a highly paid concubine or to remain just another pawn in the office trenches. She smiled. When it was over, he smiled. It was very nice. "Thank you. How do you like it?" "How's that for her?" She thought. What should she have said? She smiled again. "It was nice for me, too." She politely thanked him for the meeting and left. This meeting with Mr. Church interfered with her real work. Her thoughts returned again and again to what had happened. Now it became clear to her why her only female partner, Georgia Caligari, had always been so reserved. Jesse was willing to bet that Georgia had been paying for her place as a partner for Brack. Years. He's sure Snyder paid his dues, too, perhaps assigned to scouting young women or the most secretive massage parlors. Sure, her job was tiring and the money was huge, but Jesse knew that deep down she hated her job. She was humiliated to the extreme, and just think the only more or less happy things in her life are connected with 3 charming girls and a hopelessly lazy husband who will soon become her ex. It was like a stake in the heart. He once said that she was ready to sell her soul for a partnership, and it seems that she did it, but she wasn't sure if it was worth it. One thing she knew for sure, she had seen 3 men in her life, Mr. Church, Snyder, and Gary was the best by far. As before, Gary watched Jesse walk purposefully down the street, and then he noticed a shadow, an ominous figure that came out of the alley. The man walked straight towards Jesse. On instinct, Gary jumped out of the car and ran after him. The man, Gary was sure it was a man, had almost reached her. Gary shouted, "Hey!" The man looked up. There was something shiny in his hand. Gun, Gary rushed forward. Jesse's would-be killer fell to the ground. The pistol fell out of his hand. Gary tossed it aside. The bandit jumped up and ran back to the alley from where he came. Gary rushed to his wife. She fell into his arms. "Gary," she screamed. He held her tightly to his chest. She was shaking all over. Sobbing, she sobbed. "Oh, Gary." She was trembling. Her body was soft. He caught her sweet scent. He felt himself beginning to feel like a man. Embarrassed, he tried to pull away, but she followed him and pressed herself against his chest again. "Oh, Gary," she sobbed. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. He cupped her head with his right hand. "Jesse," he whispered. She was so warm. Her skin was damp, but it felt so natural to hold her in your arms. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears and tenderness. And suddenly it was all over. He felt her tense. A moment ago she was a defenseless girl in his arms, and the next moment she became hard as stone. Her eyes lost their tenderness. All he saw was anger. She pushed him away. "You," she screamed. Jesse turned around and ran towards her apartment. Gary watched as she rummaged through her bag, pulled out her keys, struggled to open the door, ran inside and slammed it. Gary went back and found the gun. It was an old Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver with a short barrel. Not the best weapon, most likely stolen. He checked the fuse, threw it on the passenger seat of his car, got behind the wheel, started the engine and drove home. He had never felt so bad. It seems like something good could have happened, but it didn't. Later, he received a call from Melanie. She said their mother came home and rushed into the living room, crying. Later, she said they heard Jesse crying into the night. As the days wore on and the weather grew warmer, Dorothy was getting ready to graduate from Butt High School and choose a college. She has already been accepted into 3 universities. Jessie was a special girl, always an average student in the brightest classes. She never excelled in any subject, but like her mother at her age, she loved to read and write poetry. She wanted to study English literature, but Jessie had other plans. Jessie wanted another lawyer in the family. Dorothy wasn't sure. Gary thought Jessie's parents were putting pressure on her, and Jessie, in turn, was putting pressure on Dorothy. It wasn't that important to him. The girl was only 18. She had barely graduated from school. Even in college, kids rarely know what they want. He wanted Dorothy to choose what she really liked. When she gets to college, her opinion may change dozens of times in the first year. But how do you explain this to Jessie if she doesn't even want to talk to him? The Cold War continued. There is an old saying, the only thing worse than not getting what you want is getting it. The bosses at Jessie's firm finally called a meeting to select new partners, and from the many candidates, 2 were chosen, and Jessie was one of them. She finally got everything she wanted. Now she is a partner that means more money, more responsibility, more respect, and a new, more spacious, luxurious office with a window. Jessie was sitting on top of the world, but according to Dorothy, she was unhappy. Of all the candidates, 2 were chosen, but Jessie found out that she was chosen second. Was it bad? What could be worse? Jeff Snyder was their first choice. According to Dorothy, Jessie was deeply disappointed. What more could be achieved? She got everything she wanted, but it still wasn't enough. The days grew longer, but Gary's life remained virtually unchanged. He thought that Dorothy's future was already determined. She had been accepted into several good universities, and scholarships were starting to flow, but then she unexpectedly changed her plans. She called and said she had decided not to attend a 4-year university and instead go to a community college for a year. According to her, the courses there were essentially the same. The cost would be less, and most importantly, and this had to be kept secret, she felt that her sisters would need her next year. It was May, and Jessie was at the peak of her success. Meanwhile, the house in which she lived and owned was falling apart. The girls were unhappy. Their rooms needed painting, the carpets were dirty, Daisy was leaving her footprints all over the house, and the cat suddenly started shitting in Katie's boys' shoes. No one checked the pool, and the girls suspected there was a leak. Melanie said that the refrigerator in the Arch house, she meant the gazebo, didn't work, and the lawnmower wouldn't start. They knew not to contact their mother. She was too busy. The alarm sounded, "Where is Daddy?" But if Dad comes, Mom will have to talk to him, and this will never happen. And so the girls called. They were desperate. Their dad installed a heat pump for the water filtration system, and they had a heated pool in September. Now in May, they wanted it too, but couldn't make it work. Gary arrived on a Saturday in the second half of May. The girls were at home, all 4 of them. Jessie was sleeping upstairs after a wild night, and the children were outside. Melanie came up first. "Dad, you have to fix the pool. Firstly, it leaks, and secondly, we cannot turn on the water heating." Katie came second. "I can't start the lawnmower. I forgot how. You have to show me again." Gary remembered that half the time she didn't cut the grass at all, but just rolled around the yard. They had 2 acres of land. Then Dorothy came up. "First, I need help with the flowers. The daffodils have already wilted. The Japanese willow that you bought us when we first moved has already faded and turned green. What should I do about weeds? Trees need to be pruned too." Gary said, "Let's run the lawnmower first, and then look at the pool. I don't think it's leaking. It's most likely something else." In reality, none of these matters were that important. They just wanted their daddy to be there. Gary got to work. Some gas, a new spark plug, fresh oil, and Katie was on her way. He checked the pool. Yes, there was a small leak, but it was just a hose. Something that could be easily fixed. He tested the heat pump and got it working too. He was about to help Dorothy with the flowers when they both heard an angry shout. "What is he doing here?" Katie rode a tractor. Dorothy and Melanie turned towards the house and saw their mother standing at the kitchen window, glaring at the girls. Gary smiled and shouted, "I'm helping them get the house ready for summer." Technically, they were still married. The day of the official divorce was set for June. Jessie was looking out the window and called out, "Are you free all summer?" He nodded. She added, "We need a repairman. If you don't get in the way, I'll pay you." Gary smiled and sarcastically shouted back, "I'm looking at minimum wage." She frowned and disappeared from view. Dorothy looked at her father and said in surprise, "Wow, Dad, she talked to you." Melanie added, "And she didn't say she hated you." At that moment, Jesse reappeared at the window. "Dorothy, come in for a minute, and you too, Melanie." Dorothy smiled. "I'll be back soon, Dad." Gary got busy measuring the hose and testing the seed spreader to make sure it was working. In his experience, spreaders always failed when they were filled to the brim with seed or fertilizer. He was still busy when Dorothy and Melanie returned. Dorothy said, "Mommy wants to see you." He replied, "Okay," and went into the house. She stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee. She didn't look at him but said, "Since you haven't been working all summer, you could help get the house in order." He asked, "What do you want me to do?" She looked around and answered dryly, "Come on, I'll show you." They walked through the kitchen and dining room into the living room and started up She shook the railing and said, "It's wobbly." He asked, "How did this happen?" She replied, "It's none of your business. Someone was drunk." They went up to the second floor, to the master bedroom. The old double bed was replaced with a new one king size. Her old dresser was gone, and in its place was a new dressing table. She looked at the walls and said, "I want this to be wallpapered." He replied, "I can do it." She walked past him and looked into Katie's room, wallpaper, paint, asked her which ones. He said, "Got it." They did the same for Melanie and Dorothy's rooms. They walked back downstairs to what used to be his office. He looked exactly the same as he did the day he left in December. "Nothing has changed." She said, "This is my bedroom now, but I don't like the color of the walls." He was surprised. Why is she sleeping in his old office when she has a new bed upstairs? But he didn't ask. He remembered that he himself did not like this color for the office. But it was her choice when they first moved. He didn't remind her of this, but instead asked, "Do you have any ideas about color?" She still didn't look at him. Her voice was sharp and caustic. "Choose for yourself." He said, "Okay, but I want you to approve." She did look at him, but with that disdainful look she often used. I said, "You choose." He shrugged. "Okay, anything else?" "No," she replied. "Just give the kids whatever they want." He clarified, "That's it." She looked at him again with that contemptuous look, as if he were insignificant. "Are you deaf?" He shrugged again. "No, I can hear perfectly well." She continued to look at him. He wished he could understand what she was thinking. Finally, she trembled slightly as if someone had shaken her. Her eyes softened. He thought that she might want to approach him, but was afraid. She stammered, "Okay, now go away." Gary didn't argue. He went outside. Dorothy, Melanie, and Kathy were all standing there together. Katie asked, "What did she say?" It was hopeless. He had to do it. He walked over and hugged his youngest daughter. He kissed her on the cheek, just like old times, and said, "I became a hired hand for the summer." Melanie snorted, "God, Dorothy, did you see that? Dad just slobbered all over our sister." When they were little, he often played with them, pretending to be a big monster, and chased them around the house. Right now, he raised his arms like a T-Rex and growled at Melanie, "I'll get you." She laughed and ran. He caught up with her and gently threw her to the ground. Then he gave her another big, sticky kiss on the cheek, and raising his head said, "Now where is Big Baby?" But he didn't have to chase after her. She was already lying on the ground, laughing, and said, "Here I am, Daddy." "Daddy?" Didn't he like the sound of that? He kissed her too. A couple of seconds later, all 4 father and 3 daughters were laughing on the grass. He casually looked towards the house, towards the kitchen. He saw Jessie's shadow. She was watching them. He thought that perhaps she would like to be here too. They tinkered and played a little more. Gary took measurements for the hose and promised he would return in the morning. The next day, he actually came back, fixed everything that needed to be done, and started the pool heating system. But he couldn't stay for long. He had to go back to work on Monday. To be continued, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.